tuning in via live stream from across the country. I think there's at least 6 or 7 states streaming in today. Calfee hosted its first DEI summit in February of 2020. Of course, we all know what happened right after February 2020. At the time, with the full intentions of holding the DEI summit annually. While the pandemic stopped us from hosting this event as we had originally planned, our DEI work at Calfee has continued over the past 2 years, and we know that good work has been ongoing in the legal communities and with our clients' organizations and at our law schools, bar associations, and peer firms. A few key areas that Calfee has been focused on are participation in the Mansfield 5.0 certification, recruiting diverse attorneys, implementing a sponsorship program for our diverse attorneys, and identifying targeted programs, sometimes in partnership with client organizations, to make a positive impact on diversifying specific areas of practice, like in the area of patent law, for example. We're excited to spend the next few hours hearing from several corporate legal departments and legal industry panelists about their DEI initiatives and ideas to continue on the path towards strong progress, especially in the areas of attracting, promoting, retaining, and ensuring the success of diverse legal talent. Back in 2019, when we were planning our first event, we knew that it was important to not only implement changes internally at Calfee, but there was power in collaborating, right? This is all about best practices and best ideas. And this power of collaboration with other smart and committed people in our legal community to get better at DEI, working together was critically important, and that's what this is all about. We're thrilled to continue what we all started together 2 years ago, and we consider today's program to be one step further in our journey towards successfully diversifying and bringing meaningful advances in inclusion and equity to the legal industry. It takes many voices, many ideas, and real collaboration to enact any change. So we are very excited to have a dynamic group of bright and caring people here today in Cleveland and across the country to listen, learn, share ideas, and challenge each other toward continuous progress. Especially after last week's Senate vote to confirm our next U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, we know that progress in diversifying the legal profession is possible and is happening. And we thank you again for coming together this afternoon to share ideas on furthering our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Our MC today is Kim Moses, my esteemed colleague, my partner. She's a partner in the litigation group and chair of Calfee's DEI committee. Kim and members of our DEI committee spent a great deal of time planning this event today, and we thank not only Kim and members of our DEI committee, but also our event and marketing staff who have done a great job. Turning our lobby into a television studio. So, Kim.
Thanks, Brent. So excited to be here after the stops and starts that we've had over the last couple of years. So, again, welcome. So before I get to the heart of the program, I get to do the housekeeping matters. First and foremost, the restrooms. 2 back there, men's and women's, second set upstairs. You could take the elevator or the glass stairs behind. Calfee has applied for 3 hours of CLE, professional conduct credit, for the states of Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, New York, Texas, and California. We will take care of submitting the forms for you. For those in the audience who have not registered, though, please fill out the registration at the desk so that we have the appropriate information so that we can seek credit for you. couple things. Due to the acoustics in this beautiful room, whispers carry and can be really distracting to the participants. We understand that people may have business that you need to conduct, so to the extent that you do need to have a conversation, the 2 conference rooms down here, and there are several conference rooms upstairs, and you should feel free to go there if you need to conduct business. We would ask that you silence your phones right now. Virtual attendees, you need to be tuned in on your computer, your tablet, or however you're watching this Zoom mobile app on your phone. Calling in audio only will not get you your CLE credit. There will be 3 pop-up polls for the people that are attending remotely, and you need to vote and answer those questions in order to get the CLE requirement. So that's. We hope that this is going to be an interactive program. In-person attendees, we would ask that you hopefully wait until the panel or the speaker's remarks are done, and then please address your question from the microphone in the middle, and we will answer your questions the best we can. Virtual attendees, please type your questions for the presenters into the Q&A field on your Zoom app, and we will relay those questions to the speakers. So we're going to do our best to stay on schedule. Hopefully we will get to everybody's questions, but if not, please send them to us anyway, and we will be able to share the responses after the program. There are several breaks built into the program, so please consult that. I am going to start introducing some of our speakers. If I abbreviate your background, it's not meant to be an insult. I'm just trying to move things along. So, to start out, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable Judge Solomon Oliver, Jr., Senior Judge for the United States District Court for the Northern District of Ohio. Judge Oliver earned his BA from the College of Worcester in Ohio in 1969, his JD from NYU School of Law in 1972, and his MA from Case Western Reserve in 1974. Judge Oliver began his career serving as a senior law clerk to Judge William H. Hasty in the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. He became the became a assistant U.S. attorney, becoming the chief of the civil division in 1978, and was named the chief of the appellate division in 1982. Judge Oliver left the Department of Justice in 1982 to become a professor of law at Cleveland Marshall, and from 1991 to 94 also served as the Associate Dean for Faculty and Administration. Judge Oliver was appointed to the federal bench in 1994 and started serving as the chief judge in 2010. Please welcome Judge Oliver. We look forward to his thoughtful remarks on diversity and equity and inclusion in the legal profession.
Good afternoon. And thank you, Ms. Moses. And thank you, Brandon Brown, for inviting me on behalf of the group. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, not because I have so much to impart, although I'm perfectly happy to do that, but I'm happy to be among people who are really very interested and involved in the issues that I'm involved in, and those that are subject of this program. It just feels good to be among people who are working on these issues that we'll be discussing. This has been a lifelong involvement for me. Some of you know my background generally, some of you may not. But I grew up in Bessemer, Alabama, right outside of Birmingham. I was born in 1947, so I lived in the Jim Crow South. I lived at a time when there were no black police officers in our town. I lived where you could not hold a job in any department store except for perhaps being a stock clerk. I lived in a situation where there were no black firemen. I always say to people when I describe my background in early years that there was no job that I could have in that South if a white person wanted it. That's the South that I grew up in. And so, obviously, there are some changes that took place over the years. And by the time I got to high school, however, Brown versus Board of Education had not yet arrived in Bessemer, Alabama. So all of my teachers through high school and all of my classmates were African Americans. I'm not suggesting that's the worst thing in the world. There are some pluses. But I'm just simply trying to tell you that segregation was so ingrained. And it was worse than that because there was violence. Many of you know the civil rights history. And there was very little protection that blacks could provide for themselves. And the institutions like the police department in those places were certainly an arm more of the racist institutions that existed than being there to protect our communities. And so that has moved me, given the opportunities that I've had starting in the 60s and until to this day, to be continually involved in efforts in every way I can to enhance the opportunities for minorities to work to try to make America the place that it should be, the place of its promise. That is my quest. And so when I was asked by Brandon, I thought, well, this is one of those opportunities I should take. Also, you know, judges don't get around much. And so I thought, after all this COVID and all the rest of it, and plus the fact we don't get around much, that it might not be a good thing to get out a little bit. Now, don't hold it against me when you see me leaving in a bit. I would like to be here all day, but I am in the middle of a trial. I did make the jurors and I made the lawyers understand, though, this was a priority for me, and that our break was going to be a lot longer than the break that we normally have. But with that said, again, it's just wonderful to be here with you. I know that sometimes we look at where we are ourselves, and that's important. And we need to have every one of you that represents the institutions that you represent work hard in those institutions in regard to diversity efforts. But sometimes it's good to step back and look kind of at the big picture and get a sense really in terms of how we're doing as a nation. And so I just looked, as I was preparing remarks for today, kind of at lawyers, and I didn't look at all of the places that they work, but I thought just looking at law firms a bit. I know that corporations, and I know corporations are involved in many of these diversity efforts, and some of them have taken the lead in this area. So I understand that. But ideally speaking, one would think that the number of lawyers in the nation, you would like to think they would approximate the percentage of the population of a particular group. We know that's not the case, but that's just an ideal way of thinking about things. And so I think it's always good to kind of have that big picture in mind. So if you were thinking in terms of today, 2021, those are the latest figures I have, 4.7% of lawyers were black. And that's really kind of a drop from 2011, if the numbers I have are correct, because the numbers at that time were 4.8%. And when you compare either of those numbers to the percentage of African Americans in the population, that percentage in the population is 13.4%. Now, that doesn't tell us everything we know, that there's lots more we need, but just take that to start. If you were to look at Hispanic or Latinx persons, they constitute 18.5% of the population, but only 4.8% of the lawyers. Now that is an increase of 1 percentage point, but that's over about 10 years. So we're just looking at the numbers of lawyers. And then if you look at Asian American lawyers, they are about 5.9% of the population and 2.5% of the lawyers. So 2.5% of Asian Americans are lawyers and 5.9% of the population. And if you look at Native Americans, the numbers are small to begin with, but those numbers have dropped a bit since 2011. Native Americans constitute 1% of the population, and they were 1% of the lawyers back in 2011, but now they're 0.4% of the lawyers. So just to close this part of the number presentation out, if you put this together and put all the numbers, there's 86% of the lawyers are non-Hispanic white people, while 60% of U.S. residents are non-Hispanic white people. So that's just kind of background in terms of the lawyers itself, the profession overall. Now I looked at law firm associates, and we've seen some progress here. Numbers were pretty dismal to start out. But if you look at the statistics relative to associates of color, those numbers in firms have increased from 19.53% in 2010 to 27.6% in 2021. When that's people of color, so we're not breaking it out right now in terms of African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans, but 19.53% in 2010, 27.60% in 2021. And much of the increase in representation of people of color since 2011 is due to an increase in representation of Asian American associates, which they constitute 12.49% of all associates by 2021. So that gives us a sense of associates. Let me just say a little bit more about that. Hispanic or Latinx associates constitute about 6.11% in 2021, as opposed to 3.81% in 2009. So you see some growth there. African American associates growth has been really the slowest of all of the groups. Blacks now constitute about 5.22% of associates, and that growth has lagged behind that of Latinx and Asian associates, although all of the groups obviously are below the percentage of the population. Let me just say just a little bit about females or women in terms of partners. I wanted to address that a little bit. In 2021, the percentage of female partners was 25.92%. That was a substantial change from 1993. That's the data I have, where it was 12.27%. So there's been growth there. We know that women now constitute probably more than 50% law school graduates, and so one would hope that that would be reflected going forward in terms of the associates and partners going forward. Blacks just passed 2% in terms of the threshold for partners in 2020. So if you break that out, then you will see that black female partners less than 1%, and Latinx female partners are less than 1%. Overall, black partners are about 2%. Now things have looked better somewhat in the summer classes over the last few years, and especially during the COVID period, if you look nationally. In 2021, 55.06% of summer associates were women, and 41.34% were people of color, and 25.14% were women of color. So we hope this is not temporary, but you can see that during this pandemic period, that the numbers have actually, percentages have actually increased in terms of minority associates. Since 2015, there's been a 20% increase in regard to people of color, with an 8% gain in women of color summer associates. In terms of my reality and the reality that I live as a judge, I have some perspective on what happens in my own court in terms of diversity, the people that come before me. And I will be candid with you, I can go months and maybe, and sometimes a year or more before I see any African-American lawyers at all in a civil case. Now, that's not consistent every single year. I see more black lawyers in criminal cases than I do in civil cases. And when I first came on the bench, I saw a fair number of single practitioner, somewhat older black lawyers who were practicing in the federal court, and I would see them. Most of them have retired, and I don't see very many single practitioner African-American lawyers anymore. Most of the lawyers in civil cases I would see would be from law firms. But I am telling you the truth. I go days, I go weeks, I go months, and sometimes in some years, maybe some years, before I see African-American lawyers coming in front of me. Let me just say a little bit about partners, and that gives, and then I'm going to move into just kind of some suggestions I have, my experience and some suggestions I have in regard to the profession. There's a difference, as all of you know, between the kinds of partnerships that exist. You know that better than I do. And in 2021, people of color accounted for 10.75% of all partners in major law firms. 10.75%, so that's all the groups of people of color. And women comprise 25.92%. In 1993, people of color constituted 2.55, so you're comparing 2.55 to 10.75. That's the change. In regard to women, you're comparing 12.27 to 25.92. I may have said that already, but that's what you see. And then when you get to equity partners, women grew from 9.3% to 12.6% from 2011 to 2021. So not a lot of growth there in terms of equity partners, 9.5% to 12.6%. And minority equity partners grew from 2.1% to 5.1% over this same period. And so that's kind of the landscape, and I know that you may know this better than I do, and of course you can all look this up and find information for yourself. But just because of my upbringing, my orientation, I'm working today where I am to make the change I can, but I'm also thinking globally, I'm thinking more nationally in terms of what if we dream big, not for tomorrow, but for a day, for forever. What would it be like? So I always like to compare kind of that with society as a whole. So what kinds of things, I'll be brief on this, what kinds of things have I myself been involved in terms of efforts to increase diversity in the profession? I've done some of that through my clerks. And of course, you can only have so many clerks over a period of time. But I tried to model the kind of environment that I wanted to live in, the kind of environment that I think we should have in our profession. I've done the best I can do on that, I think. And this is not bragging, but it is a sense, trying to give you a sense of my commitment and what I think can happen if you're committed to working to find people, providing the environment for them, and then the encouragement and the mentorship that, that they need. I've had 42 total law clerks. I've had 24 African-American law clerks. I've also had Asian Hispanic law clerks. I've had 24 female law clerks, 18 male law clerks. 10 of those law clerks have decided they want to go on and do circuit court clerkships. And that's not always what clerks want to do. So that's not necessarily the norm, because they want to get that clerkship, and then most of them want to get out and go to the firm or go to Department of Justice or wherever they're going. But 10 of them have decided to do that, and one went to the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. And where do I get my law clerks from in terms of trying to put together this diversity? Well, I go local and I go national. I go wherever I can find people that I think can serve as good law clerks, people who are good human beings, and people who are committed to excellence, but also doing something beyond themselves, whatever context they're in. So I don't have any predisposition about where they should go, but I do have some thoughts about if they're going to go, wherever they go, that they're going to be the kinds of people that will make a contribution and will work to on the kinds of issues that are important, I view as important. So they've come from CSU and Case and Ohio State, within the state, and even other law schools in the state. But they've come from the schools that law clerks come from. You know, it's a kind of an elite, it shouldn't necessarily be that way, but it's kind of an elite job. So I've had clerks, for example, from Harvard and Chicago and Columbia and NYU and Northwestern and Michigan and Duke and Virginia and BU and Georgetown. But the point is that I haven't limited myself to those traditional places where law clerks normally come from. And I have made it clear to those who want to know that I will give serious consideration to excellent law students from wherever they come. And that's why I've been able to get the kind of diversity that I have. And they've gone out to be dean of the law school, for example, at Boston University, or law professors in other places, or work in the Civil Rights Division. I have 5, for example, African-American females that have been AUSAs, Assistant U.S. Attorneys. There's just I have a number of them that are partners in law firms or have been partners in law firms. And I had some that have been nominated to the U.S. District Court. This is not, I hope you don't take this as bragging at all. What I'm trying to do is to say that we've got to work hard in these law firms, and we've got to work hard to get more people to be clerking and in the whole range of jobs that are recognized in our profession, and they should become more representative so that we can have then people throughout those professions. Now, let me just be quick and come to a conclusion here. I worked on the bar programs here, the 3 R's program. We have a Stephanie Tubbs Jones Summer Legal Academy where high school students come and are mentored. The Lewis Stokes Scholars Program, where college students come and they are mentored and receive a stipend. And I commend those law firms here in Cleveland that have participated in the Cleveland Bar Association's Minority Clerkship Program. Those are the kind of pipeline programs that we need, that we have to make even bigger, we have to make even stronger. But we need that because we don't have enough people in the law schools. We talked about 13.4% of African Americans in terms of population. but there's only 8-point-something% of African Americans in law schools. And so there's no way that the overall gap is going to be closed until we get more people in law schools. But coming out of law schools, African Americans, Latinx persons, Asian Americans still don't have the opportunities that one would expect by comparison to their peers. So we've got a lot of places to work. Not all can be done by you, but in our profession. Work on the pipelines, increase the number of people who go to law school, but let's work to make sure that the people who come out of law school have the kinds of opportunities that other law students have. I know that I've been preaching to the choir here, but what I've learned in talking to associates who come to talk to me is that sometimes, and this is a minority associate, sometimes they feel lonely in law firms. Sometimes they feel like they're not getting enough work. Occasionally they will feel like they're getting too much with very little supervision. They feel like they can't find mentors. They feel like that other of their classmates are getting ahead of them because people are not walking down the hall to their office, but walking down the hall to other person's office, people who are not African American or Latinx or Asian American. These are some of the things I've heard over my time on the bench as I've talked to minority lawyers. And I think you've heard this, some of you know this, and you're working on it. But I think we're going to have to look at everything in the law firm through the lens of race. And I mean in a positive way. It has become part of the culture. If you have a retreat, it should be part of that. And you have to rely on experts to come in and talk to you about how do you deal with unconscious bias. And then you have to set goals, because if you don't set goals, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think those goals ought to be laid out. They're not quotas. They're not quotas, but they're goals. But that's how we work in life. And there should be incentives. And if people who do well at it, there should be some compensation tied to it. And if people don't do well at it, it should be part of their evaluation. It should be from the top down. And you can't do it well if you don't have people committed at the top. This is my experience. I'll just close out by saying I serve on the Board of Trustees at the College of Worcester, my college. After the Floyd murder, we went into a period of evaluating ourselves, of trying to make sure that we were not, to take account of the fact that we wanted not just to be people who weren't racist, but we wanted to be what was called anti-racist. And some of you read books, Kennedy's book about that. And so the question is, what do you do? So we looked at every single thing in the college and all of our responsibilities, and we sorted out whether it was investment committee or whether it was in the area of admissions or buildings and grounds or whatever. We looked at those areas. We worked on talking through things and getting what we call deliverables and evaluating those things on an annual basis. I think you have to do it in a firm. And I would say, lastly, that it's not just the commitments you make to the associates that you have, or the lawyers who are minorities, in terms of getting them and also making sure that they get through the process. But think about overall the other business that you do. Make it part of your life's view of equality, of fairness. Think about that and use that not just in terms of the people that you hire, but also the people that you give business to. I know the firms are doing some of that, not firms, the corporations are doing some of that, but I'd ask you to think about it holistically. Everything you do, look at it through the lens of race, or when I say race, or at least through a diverse lens, including all of the groups that are included in that. So let me finish. I've taken more than my time, Ms. Moses, I know, but let me just thank all of you again for inviting me to be part of this program. You're grappling with some of the most important issues to our profession. I know you'll agree with me that no race, religion, nationality, or sex has monopoly on talent. Neither should they have a monopoly on opportunities. I commend you on this and your other efforts to make our profession more inclusive and to make America's promise a reality for all of its citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Oliver, so much for sharing your personal experiences and thoughts. I think you'll all agree you've given us a lot to consider and a lot to work on. So thanks again. In planning this afternoon's events, we thought that it would be both interesting and inspiring to learn about some of the specific initiatives that are being undertaken at 3 major corporations that have operations here in Northeast Ohio. And see what they are doing and focused on in terms of diversifying the legal profession and their organizations. After, we're going to have one presentation now, then we're going to have a panel discussion, and we'll hear from corporate legal leaders from GE Lighting and Key Corp after our panel discussion. But our first corporate counsel speakers are from Eaton Corporation. And it's my pleasure to introduce Stan Ball, Charlie Price, and Emily Kwan from Eaton Corporation. Stan serves as Vice President and Chief Litigation Counsel for Eaton Corporation, where he develops and implements strategies for resolving legal disputes involving Eaton's various lines of business. Stan also oversees recovery efforts associated with fraud and theft investigations. As an executive sponsor of the law firm management team, Stan is responsible for selecting, evaluating, and managing Eaton's panel of outside counsel globally. He also represents Eaton's Business Roundtable staff team supporting efforts to advance racial equity and justice. And Stan serves the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity as an outreach committee member, and he was a member of the 2016 Pathfinder program. As litigation counsel for Eaton, Charlie Price minimizes litigation risk and manages claims efficiently and effectively both before and after filing of a lawsuit. This includes developing strategies for reducing outside legal costs and improving litigation results. And Charlie serves on the Dean's Cabinet for Diversity and Inclusion at the CWRU School of Law. And finally, Emily Kwan serves as litigation counsel for Eaton. Prior to joining Eaton in August of 2021, Emily served as an equity partner at Huff Powell Bailey, a trial law firm with services across the southeastern U.S. And most recently was served as an equity partner at the national litigation firm of Weinberg, Wheeler, Hudgens, Gunn, and Dial. Emily served as a volunteer lawyer with the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation and as a coordinator and evaluator for the Georgia High School mock trial competition. Stan, Charlie, Emily, welcome. We look forward to your comments and your remarks. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
We had I'll give you all a second. I think we had a deck. If we can show it, that'd be great. While that pops up on the screen, let me do some quick housekeeping. Thank you. Where I come from, they call them church announcements. So a couple of quick things. Let me just thank the Calfee team for welcoming us into your home. If you're a Calfee attorney or support staff, if you can just wave just so I can acknowledge you, I really appreciate your time. A special thanks to Susan and Maggie and Kim for organizing this event and putting up with our team as we were trying to coordinate things to make sure everything went smoothly. I also want to thank my team for participating. I volunteer them to do a lot of things, and they do it with grace and wonderful composure. When it comes to DE&I efforts, that's one area where I don't have to tell them to do much. They're always eager, and in fact, they push me to go one step further. The last thing I want to say as a part of my opening remarks here is, as you're listening to these conversations and participating and ask questions, I want you to do two things as a part of your reflective process. One, since we last met in February of 2020, I'd like you to ask yourself, what's the evidence of your personal commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity? Not your firm, not your law, not your legal department, not the Bar Association. What's the evidence of your personal commitment from February 2020 to the present? And then as you leave here around 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock, if you hang around with Michael Bowen too much, ask yourself, what is your personal commitment going to be for the next year? What are you willing to do as an individual to move the needle in our profession? You're gonna tell me how to work this thing. All right, here we go. Okay, a little slight delay, or probably user error more than anything. I want to accomplish three things in the next 20 or so minutes. The first thing I'm going to do is walk you through where we've been as a litigation team, and I'm going to use some lagging indicators to demonstrate to you our progress. The second thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about our active partnerships, both with law firms and with educational institutions that we think are helping us meet our objectives from a DE&I perspective. And then the last thing I'm going to do, which is really the heart of this conversation, is I'm going to turn it over to Emily and Charlie to lead a discussion about our lessons learned and highlight some of the areas where we've messed up and, quite frankly, where we want to improve. Feel free at any point in time to ask questions. This is your time, so you can use it as you please. But absent that, let's just have some fun. I won't cover all of these metrics. I think they're important, but they represent the impact of what we've done in the past. So I just want to cover three of them and just share some preliminary thoughts. The first I want to talk to you about is, if you look at the top, the second from the left, I want to focus on that statistic, which is from 2019 through the end of 2021. Our spend with U.S. minority timekeepers in North America increased from 15% to 32%. And here's some key takeaways on why we want to highlight that. Number one, contrary to popular belief, diverse talent actually exists. It's out there. And as an in-house legal team that is a buyer of legal services, in order to meet that metric, to move the needle, it's incumbent upon us as in-house lawyers to get out into the market and find the talent. That means that when we participate in conferences, when we participate in bar associations, our objective, if we're truly committed to this work, must mean that we have to engage, meet people, find out their areas of expertise, and take some chances, take some risks. The other thing that's important at that space is that we should not be above making cold calls. And that's one of the things that we do all the time, is we pick up the phone and say, hey, can you get a team together? We'd love to meet you, learn about your area of expertise, and let's talk. The second thing that I want to just highlight here from that statistic and the growth that we've seen over the couple of years is that those are reflective of moments of courage. Every in-house lawyer who you meet, whether in this room or you know them outside of this conference, will tell you that there are moments where you have to make a decision on who you're going to use for outside counsel. And oftentimes it's easy to use every team that you've used in the past, to never ask whether they can staff a team in a diverse way, and to just let the status quo be. In order for you to really move the needle, it's going to take your leadership creating an environment where people feel empowered to stand up and say, hey, let's try somebody new. Let's at least ask for them to provide a diverse team for us in order for things to actually change. The second thing I want to talk about, if you go all the way at the top to the far right, and this is something that we really wanted to highlight, and we've done, I think, pretty well as a team, is to showcase diverse talent in our internal and our external meetings. And what does that mean? Just as you all have convened us here for a conference, just as law teams, in-house and external, create CLE programs, it is critically important for diverse talent to be able to demonstrate their subject matter expertise. We are not doing ourselves any favors by relegating diverse talent to only being able to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We must create spaces where people can demonstrate their subject matter expertise and why. Let's just be real frank with each other. That is important to directly address the unconscious, and let's be frank, sometimes conscious bias that diverse talent does not have the technical expertise to be able to resolve some of the most complex legal issues that our companies and our clients face. And so it's important that we intentionally staff our conferences, our CLEs with people who are diverse to give them an opportunity to showcase their subject matter expertise. Last thing I'll say on that, and it's a miss that we see a lot of clients make, is that at the end of every year, when it's time for us to report our CLE to the state, we'll get these beautiful packets that have all these wonderful free CLEs, and then I'll look at the bios, and there will be no one who is diverse. Then I'll go to the firm's website, and there'll be this wonderful, flowery, beautiful statement about their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is a miss. It's a total miss. And if we're being smart, if we're being strategic, if we're actually going to commit to the words that come out of our mouth, let's not miss opportunities like that to showcase our diverse talent. Last thing I'll say on this slide, I want to bring your attention to the top, the third all the way from the right, and on the bottom right-hand corner, those two statistics about our relationship partners, those who are female and those who are US minorities. Oftentimes when we have this conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, we talk about pipelines, we talk about associates, but we forget that partners, diverse partners, have the same exact issues. And oftentimes it's worse because there's a monetary expectation for them to have a book of business. We encourage you, the same as we have adjusted our strategy, to invest directly with diverse partners to ensure that they have the internal equity and the internal influence to move their law firm forward. It does you no good to be a partner in name and inside your organization you have zero influence whatsoever. And so as you think about your strategy, I would encourage you to invest in diverse partners directly and not just wait for the pipeline to manifest itself through the partnership ranks. I'm just going to highlight, we have 4 of our kind of key partnerships that we have with law firms. I'm going to check my time here. And I'm not going to talk about all 4 of them. I just want to talk about 2 of them that I think are important for in-house counsel to invest in. The first is establishing a rotation, a consistent rotation of externs. We've partnered with Cleveland State University and Case Western University so that every semester we have 2 externs coming to work at our in-house department. And the reason we do that, it's a term that we like to float around, it's called jetpacking. And what jetpacking is for us, and I'm sure Charlie's got a little smirk on his face, is we want to find the talent, the folks that people have overlooked. We want to expedite their learning curve, and we want to facilitate their advancement in their career. And the reason we do that, and I'll give you a great example, there was a student who we came across, I'll call her Jane Doe. In her first semester of law school, she had a D in one of her classes. By the time we came across her, she was in her second semester, second year. As you can imagine, the firms that she wanted to engage with, they wouldn't talk to her because of that D. What they didn't pay attention to, what they missed, is that instead of giving up, semester after semester, her grades increased dramatically. She graduated with honors, she passed the bar the first time, and right now she works at a large national firm. Our investment in her was not that we weren't the golden ticket. We certainly didn't put something in her that she didn't have by herself. But what the value that our externship program gave was instilling a sense of confidence that she could do it and providing a platform for her to showcase her expertise to propel her to the next level. So if you have the ability to establish externship programs as an in-house counsel, I encourage you to do so. The other thing I just want to highlight on this one is the third box over is our Second Chance Business Coalition. It's something I'm very, very proud of. And the reason I want to talk about it is because it's an example of your law team not just driving diversity, equity, inclusion in law, but using your legal skills, your expertise to drive a corporate DE&I strategy that has an impact outside of the law function. So what does this thing do? What does our Second Chance Business Coalition do? Our CEO served as the chair of the Equitable Justice Subcommittee for the Business Roundtable, and part of our mandate was to make an impact when it comes to reentry. As we all know, minorities have a disproportionate impact when it comes to the justice system, and one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest hurdles is their ability to find gainful employment so that the recidivism rate will drop. We set out a list of public policies that we supported, but instead of just waiting for Washington to act, we partnered with the CEO of JP Morgan and established the Second Chance Business Coalition. Today, that coalition has 40 of America's largest companies supporting efforts to reduce barriers to employment, not just in Washington, but within the walls of their own organizations. Why am I saying this to you? Here's the win-win. Instead of, in addition to our internal law team driving that strategy, we picked up the phone and called Jackson Lewis, who was one of our partners from an employment law perspective, and said, hey, we're getting word from our coalition members, particularly from their HR, compliance, and legal professionals. They have questions about how we can actually implement these strategies in our organizations. And the win-win was, Jackson Lewis, will you come in and provide training? Will you work with us and answer these questions? And Jackson Lewis, you know what they said? You mean to tell me every other month I'll be in front of the legal, HR, and compliance teams of 40 of America's largest corporations providing legal advice and showcasing my talent? Where do I sign up? The reason I highlight this for you is that there are no bad ideas. There are no crazy, outrageous ideas when it comes for law firms and in-house legal departments partnering together to move the needle. And so if we're bold enough every year to ask for rate increase requests that come to my office, let's be bold enough to create new opportunities to partner together and move the needle in our industry. I want to take the last 10 minutes, I got 10? And I want to hand it over to my teammates to talk about some of the lessons learned that we have as we've been working through our strategy. So Charlie, let me kick it off to you. You know, one of the first things that you wanted to highlight was start where you are and be honest. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think that lawyers are the best problem solvers in the world. We're professional problem solvers, and when we take a big problem and we get it from a client, we always know it's never where we want it to be, right? And diversity is a big problem, and we're not where we want to be. None of us are. So we got to start wherever we are, and that means looking at our individual organizations and our unique challenges and the composition of our institutions and our unique challenges and our leadership and our culture and all those things, and approaching it with a lot of humility to say, this is where we are. And the reason that's important is because it's really easy to read an article on HBR or LinkedIn about best practices, grab that, hand it to someone and say, this is what we're going to do. Here's the template right here. And the problem with doing that is each of our organizations is unique. And we have unique cultures and compositions. So if we take that, we feel like we've done something, right? We feel like we've accomplished something. I read this article, it has great ideas, and now we're going to try and do it. But it won't work. It's not ideal. And there's two main reasons why it's not ideal. One is because if you're applying best practices, then you are, by definition, you're average. And one of the things that Brent said in his opening remarks was we have to expand those best practices, right? And that gets to the people in this room, right? Smart, paid, professional problem solvers. The answers are going to come from the people in this room. And so you have to go out and try things, and you have to experiment and learn and approach it with humility. That's the first thing. The second point about this is that if we want to, the problem hasn't been solved with best practices, right? And so to solve the problem within every organization, you have to do it within the confines of your organization. That's really important and valuable because if you do that, if you can pull that off, you will have a competitive advantage. And lawyers want proprietary competitive advantages. You will make your organizations, your law departments, your law firms stand out, and it'll allow you to attract more talent. Now, we hope you share that. We hope you share that with the world, but getting it first has tremendous value. And so you want to create insights before and learnings before the best practices.
Emily, you were talking about giving meaning to platitudes earlier when we were preparing for this. What does that mean to you?
Yep. Thanks, Dan. First, let me say there is no legitimate debate over the business value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The data is clear. Diverse teams led by diverse leaders are critical to the growth, financial performance, and frankly, the relevance of any organization that is hoping to compete in the market. And this includes the legal market. In my view, it's actually particularly true for the legal market since our service is interpreting the law, advising on the law, and arguing the law. So folks, if there was just one correct interpretation or one correct approach, we'd all be out of jobs. So accepting the fact that DEI is a key business issue, it follows that any successful organization must treat it like one. So that means installing a trained professional to lead and oversee DEI efforts, paying that person, and giving that individual real power in your business, a direct line to the top. That also means collecting and analyzing data on DEI efforts. That means tracking those metrics, reporting on them, and making them an agenda item at every board meeting, at every partners meeting, at every members meeting, and every executive committee meeting. That brings me to my next point, and this is a crucial one. Positive, productive change must be organizational. So there must be complete buy-in at all levels. Like we've discussed, platitudes are really not enough, nor is it enough to expect the underrepresented folks in your law firms and your organizations to do all of the heavy lifting. I see so many allies in today's audience. That's wonderful to see. You all hold so much power to advance these issues. Your efforts in this space really matter. And this is particularly true in hiring. I want to talk for just a second about broadening the scope of your talent search. Think outside the box when it comes to hiring. Think outside the box when it comes to looking for talent. Take a hard look at the composition of your hiring committee. Does it put forth your organization's views and values on DEI? Ask yourself if your organization is accounting for the fact that statistically speaking, women will only apply for a job position if they feel they meet 100% of the posted requirements. By contrast, men feel comfortable applying for a position when they meet only 60% of the requirements. Challenge the impulse to hire only from certain law schools or candidates with certain GPAs. I loved hearing Judge Oliver speak earlier about how he has not limited hiring in his courtrooms to traditional law clerk schools. Question whether your social events are comfortable spaces for everyone or just for those who grew up a certain way. Broadening your thinking in this way is critical not just for hiring, but also for retention, a topic which Charlie will expand on now.
Yeah, so then this on the last bullet here, we talk about it in the context of standing ovations, and here's what we mean. We're talking about standing ovations, particularly for all young and developing lawyers, but particularly pay attention to diverse lawyers. It's a really important and maybe overlooked component of, we think, retention and development. So years ago, the Cleveland Orchestra right here in our backyard wanted to measure whether their performances were improving over time. And there was all these complicated ways and suggestions to do this. And they involved surveys and lots of people doing lots of things, and they were expensive. But they came up with something really simple. They measured the standing ovations. Were the standing ovations increasing or were they decreasing? If they were increasing, they could say, well, we have a pretty simple measurement, but it's pretty telling, it's pretty insightful. We must be doing something right. And so it's not scientific for law firms, but we would encourage you to pay attention to the standing ovations of your young lawyers. And what we mean by that is that the defining moments of elevation, of insight, of connection, of pride, of standing up and being celebrated for something. Watch those moments, because those are career-defining moments. And if you want to keep people at your firm, in addition to paying them well, in addition to giving them good benefits and having a diversity and inclusion policy and all that stuff, but if you really want to build that, then start creating those moments for them and making sure that when there are opportunities being discussed and they are not present in the room, make sure that you're discussing them, make sure that you're bringing up their names so they can have those defining moments. It will go a long way. We see it all the time with the lawyers that we work with, and it's really cool when it happens.
I see that we can take maybe one question. Don't have a whole heck of a lot of time, but if there aren't any questions, all right. Thanks. The last thing is just as a parting word. You know, a lot of times in-house teams will ask you to send face cards in. Will ask you for statistics. We recognize that it's an onerous process, but sometimes you may be wondering, okay, well, show us your face cards. You know, show us who are you actually working with. And so I would not come in front of this audience without being transparent about who we're investing in. This is our team. You know, the couple of folks that you see up on this stage, we do everything we can to push forward with our DE&I efforts. But it's our investment in this group that's on this screen who really help us get it done. And so as you think about your teams, whether you're in an in-house department or whether you are in a law firm, I would encourage you to really be cognizant of what, if someone just throws the pictures up on the screen, what does that say? What does that mean? What are you communicating? When you put up social media posts about your team, who's a super lawyer, who's been promoted to partner, what does that say? What does that mean? What are you communicating? And so I want to thank you all for your time. I appreciate the invitation, and we'll talk to you soon.
I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking Stan, Charlie, and Emily for their thoughtful insights and the benefit of their experiences. We're going to take a quick break right now, about 10 minutes. There are refreshments in the back. Please help yourself. You remember where the restrooms are, and we'll see you back here shortly.
Hi, welcome back, everyone. If I can ask you to return to your seats. So I'm Art Hall. I'm the Cleveland partner in charge here at Calfee, and also the firm administrative partner and on the DEI committee of the firm. And I'm really excited to have the chance to moderate this panel today. This is a very incredible group of people that have a lot of good insights on the issues we've been already hearing about today. I don't think I have to do a lot of moderation. I will start with a couple questions, but I want to introduce the group. I'm going to do kind of short introductions. If you can, their full bios are in the materials you got earlier. So starting closest to me, moving on here. First we have Brian Adamson. Brian is the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and the David L. and Ann Brennan Professor of Law at Case Western. Among many other achievements, he's also earned the Diversity and Inclusion Certificate from Cornell University. Next to Brian is our own Brandon Brown. Brandon's an associate in the litigation group here at Calfee, is also a member of the Calfee's DEI committee. He serves also as the first vice president of the Norman S. Minor Bar Association, which is the largest organization of African American lawyers in the state of Ohio. Interestingly, we actually met Brandon 2+ years ago at this event when he was asking incredibly interesting questions from the audience, and we had a chance to get to know him afterwards, and he's startlingly sure afterwards. Next to Brandon is Richik Sarkar. Richik is a litigation, data privacy, and ESG partner at Dinsmore and Scholl LLP, and he's president of the South Asia Bar Association of Ohio. He's also he's a 2020 Leadership Council on Legal Diversity Alumni Executive Council member and a member of the Greater Cleveland Partnership Board, where he serves as a member of the Equity and Inclusion Committee and co-chair of the Board Diversity Task Force. Next to Richik is Dave Phillips. Dave is the General Counsel, Senior Vice President General Counsel of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. And as the Chief Legal Officer, Dave is responsible for managing the company's legal compliance and ethics functions worldwide. And then we have Matthew On. Matthew is the Visiting Assistant Professor of Law at Cleveland Marshall College of Law, a graduate at NYU Law School, most recently served as a research and writing attorney and federal public defender. And then finally, Andrian Horton, who is a partner and chief legal officer at Dealer Tire since 2021. And as part of that role, she advises the company on growth strategy from a legal perspective, identifies its risk, creates innovative solutions, and assists in setting and implementing their governance policies. So, it's an incredible group. I've had a chance to have a conversation with them last Friday, and I think a lot of the topics that we heard earlier today already were the type of topics that this group wanted to talk about. So I'm going to start off kind of, as part of our conversation, we were kind of talking about how we need to think outside the box. We have to, kind of break down some of the traditional paradigms that exist in law firms, particularly in corporations, that maybe stop innovation. Kind of want to start from the beginning of a diverse attorney's life cycle, working all the way up to some of the challenges with being an equity partner at law firms, which is definitely an issue to talk about, but starting with law school. And I'm going to actually, start off here really with the law school guys and ask them to start off, and we can jump in. But what are some of what we can do at a law school level, both in the recruiting side as well as once they're already there, in order to prepare diverse students for success, both in-house or in the law firm world, and how can corporations and law firms, this is really a question for everybody else, maybe help partner with you in that process?
Who wants to go first, Matt or you?
Sure, I can start and hopefully kick off the conversation. So, I had actually sort of an unusual experience coming through law school. I went to a law school with a fairly substantial Asian American population, but the Asian American Affinity Group, APALSA, at my law school was very focused on making sure that Asian Americans knew that firm careers were available to them. I came through not wanting to go to a law firm, and so as a result sort of disengaged from APALSA for that reason, right? But I think sort of taking that in reverse, right? A lot of what tends to happen in law school is folks get there and then they think that, oh, this kind of career path isn't for me, right? There's sort of a lot of this, quote, self-selection as we talk about it out of certain kinds of careers by certain kinds of folks, right? And so I think that, right, it's important for employers to try to get ahead of that, right? There's a lot of employer-student interaction in the law school setting, right? And for employers not just to message that they're interested in sort of expanding the perception of who works at certain places, but to also demonstrate that through the practices that we've heard talked about already as well.
Agree with everything that Matt said, especially as it regards making or informing students, particularly historically underrepresented minorities and women, that these places and spaces are available and open to them. I think that is a very critical message that law firms and corporations can send. But I wanted to open, in a way, extending some of Judge Oliver's statistics in terms of what law schools look like in terms of the applicants. And this is data from actually from yesterday, as of yesterday, in terms of the applicants for law schools. So according to the Law School Admissions Council, in 2022, overall in the United States, there are 56,157 applicants for law school. Now that's down from last year. Last year was 62,961. Right. Ethnicity, the number of Aboriginal or Strait Islanders, Australians are number 5. There are 5. American Indian or Alaska Native, there are 1,109, and that's down from the year before. Asian, this year's applications of Asian Americans or Asians is 7,201. That's down from 7,466. Black or African American stands at 7,403, and that's down from 8,099. Caucasian white is down to 33,965 from 39,000. Hispanic Latinx is down as well. 8,700 there were 8,700 applicants last year. This year there are 8,300. And so we see these statistics, and then fewer and fewer overall minorities applying to law school. So what does that say about the pool of law school students, and by extension, lawyers, summer associates who will become lawyers? It doesn't bode well. And many of you, or most of the law firms and legal organizations and corporations, are fighting, if you will, over a small and shrinking pool of individuals. So what can law schools do, or what should law schools do? I'm a strong believer in pipeline programs and an adherent to those, but I'm also a big fan of Fred Gray, a civil rights leader who represented Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin, Martin Luther King Jr., who grew up in segregated Alabama, was not admitted to go to law school in the South in Alabama, in his home state, came to Case Western Reserve School of Law in about 1951, and vowed to go back south after he graduated and dismantle everything that was segregated that he could find, and to basically blow up institutions legally. And I think that law firms and law schools need similarly to shake up the structures that normally inform how we make decisions about who's admitted and who's advancing, and create spaces that are open and make people feel that they belong. Some things that we're trying, and we think that this would be a great collaborative opportunity for law firms and legal organizations, is our strategic partnerships. So over the last 2 years, we've engaged in intentional contracts, intentional agreements with historically black colleges and universities, with tribal colleges and universities, and with Hispanic serving institutions to offer their graduating students incentives to come to Case Western. We were able to offer them at a minimum, for example, 50% scholarship. If they perform at a B or better in their fall semester, we can guarantee them a summer job or a subsidy if they're going to go to work for a low pay or no pay organization. We admit them at no cost and no tuition cost to our new Jumpstart program, where they can take criminal law in the summer along with legal writing. And so we think that those agreements, now we have them with Tuskegee University, we have them with Morehouse, Spelman, Hampton, Dominican University in Illinois, University of Alaska, Anchorage, University of North Carolina, Pembroke, and we're working on ones with Fisk, Florida A&M University, University of South Carolina, and we're going to continue to expand those strategic partnerships to work with their pre-law advisors to create a pipeline directly from those schools to our school to increase the diversity of our law school. And we think that law firms can have a pivotal role in that and help us in that. I'll talk about that at some point in the future if enough time allows. I've taken up enough time now.
So thank you. And I'm interested, I know, Matthew, you said when you were in law school that kind of the law firm world, you said that's not for you, right? And I guess I'm wondering, and I've heard that, I think I heard that from you, Brandon, recently in the conversation, what could corporations do, what could law firms do to kind of help change that perspective? Like, where's that perspective coming from? I open this up to anybody, really. Where's that perspective coming from, and what could we do or others do to try to help change that?
I think that's a tricky one. I think that folks come to law school for all different kinds of reasons, right? And And I think oftentimes law school is sort of it's a space where you're trying to discover what you really want to do, right? Unless you know somebody who actively practices law, right? It's hard to understand what law practice looks like before you get to law school. And so I do think that perhaps having some of those resources available to folks who are thinking about law school, having some of those resources available to folks who are just starting out in law school, that might be one way to help folks make decisions that are that sort of align ultimately with what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this is where pipeline programs are so important. But just the idea of what it means to cultivate diverse talent from as early a point as possible. So I think that when it comes to diversity and when it comes to pipeline programs, I can speak personally, having been through many pipeline programs. I knew going into law school what it looked like to work in a law firm because I had done it when I was in high school and when I was in college. But I recognize that that is an extremely unique experience and one that is just so few and far between. Now, luckily in Cleveland, there are some really great local pipeline programs. The CMBA has done a great job of establishing a pipeline as early as 11th grade that really does extend for most inner city Cleveland students straight through to and through law school through the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Leadership Academy, the Lewis Stokes Scholars Program, and the Minority Clerkship Program, all of which can act as a way to demystify what it means to work in a law firm, what it means to work as in-house counsel in the corporate world. And I think that's a lot of it, to Matthew's point. A lot of it is just a lack of knowledge, right? Ignorance of what it even means. When you watch TV, other than Suits, maybe, is there even a real media representation of what we do? And then we can argue all day about how inaccurate the media representation is on top of that, right? So I think some of it are the pipelines. I think another thing is, I think really defining what firms do and the way that firms market themselves to students. I remember being a student, again, even though I'd been at a firm, still not quite knowing exactly what it means to be a lawyer there, and also not knowing why I should be there. I think for some places of work, it seems kind of obvious, right? For prosecutors or defense attorneys in the criminal world, right? There's this feeling of I'm wearing this white hat, I'm fighting for justice, that is not as inherent in our world of business, even though we know that what we do could be just as important. And I just think we have to think about the way that we're selling ourselves to these students besides just a paycheck, because often it feels like that's really what's at the forefront, right? You'll make the most money if you start at this place. But that's not, one, it doesn't grab everybody, and two, it's not sustainable.
I'm just going to add that it's important to get, to make early and personal contact. Extending the pipeline to college, certainly high school, but some examples of extending it to colleges. In my encounters, for example, at those institutions that we have these strategic partnerships with, juniors and sophomores are talking to us, and they have real barriers of even being able to afford the LSAT prep exams, let alone be able to afford to take LSAT preps. So what if we could partner, or what if we could, as an institution, a law school, provide subsidies for these students to take it and put a name on it, right? The Calfee LSAT scholarship, right? The Jones Day, the Squire Pattons, the Dinsmore LSAT scholarship. Another really interesting thing that I hope eventually bears fruit is that since we've created these relationships with pre-law advisors, why not get lawyers and law firm representatives to join us with talking to those pre-law advisors and putting you in front of those students, getting you and getting your firm in those with those students. Craig Nard, one of our professors who does the IP work there, He spoke with the engineering school students at Tuskegee. Why aren't law firms talking to those students who are engineers about possible careers as patent lawyers, or even to get a patent certification to diversify the profession in that space, as we just talked about earlier? So I think that there are very real and concrete things that can be done in that regard.
And I'll just add, I mean, I might just boil it down to support. Like, I think about my personal situation. I was the first person to go to college, obviously first person to go to law school. My parents worked for General Motors. I didn't know anything about corporate life, about law firm life. And you can just boil it down to, did I have someone that I could go into their office and ask a question to say, I don't understand this, I don't know what I should be doing. And I think anyone can do that without a whole lot of training, and, you know, you don't have to talk a lot about, go into their office and sit down and see how they're doing, and open yourself up in a way that they can ask questions that they might be uncomfortable asking.
I just want to hop back in. This may be preempting a later question, but sort of thinking about the law school experience, right? There's not just a mystery about how this practice works, but also somewhat of a mystique, right? So demystify, I think, could sort of talk about both of those things, right? In terms of like, oh, right, these are fancy firm jobs that if I'm not like the guy in suits, or I'm not like a brilliant like law school exam taker, that I don't have access to, right? I mean, and to the point I think that was made in the earlier panel, right? Oftentimes, a lot of students feel like if they are not perfect in their first year, this is automatically something that's closed to them. And yet at the same time, right, I mean, just a show of hands, how many folks have done any hiring out of law schools in this audience? Also me. How many of those folks actually expected somebody to come in out of law school and understand the full scope of the business immediately? Right, exactly. Well, okay. And so this is the thing, is that even the most brilliant exam taker, right, will need a lot of training in order to become a good attorney in that practice, right? And query, I think, at that point, how much those law school exams are actually going to help you do that, right? And certainly, right, somebody who has a 3.9 is probably going to be very good at legal analysis and may pick things up very quickly. But somebody who has a 2.9 is somebody who is writing these law school exams. I couldn't tell you whether or not that person will actually be good in practice, right? And maybe this takes a lot more work in terms of how you recruit students and who you pick. But, right, I think that there are ways to try to sort of get out of the mold of, right, we need to use grades as an absolute cutoff or as the first thing that we look at when we're trying to find folks who are really interested in the kind of work that we do, who will put in the work to do that, and who may stay longer than somebody who has good grades and doesn't know what else to do.
So Matthew, assuming we all did what you just suggested, which I think we all know that part of the solution here is broadening the pipeline, broadening the funnel of people coming in the door. Assuming we did that and we have a lot of diverse talent in a corporation or a law firm, okay? What can we do better? I'm going to ask our in-house folks to give us our thoughts. What can we do better in order to retain diverse talent once we get them in the door?
Well, so you're looking
Yeah, I'm looking right at you,
Dave.
Dave.
There's only 2 minutes on here, so I'll jump. So look, it's a good question, but I guess I want to start with, so when we think of it on, sort of, you got clients, and then law firms, and then you got law schools, and then you got the education system going down, right? And this is not a novel statement, but the problem is extremely complicated because you're talking decades, yet centuries of systemic barriers that have been put in place. And so if there's obviously no one solution, otherwise we'd all be doing it, and sort of the one level at a time. If I just as a client say, hey, law firms, I expect you to do this, and comply with these things. It's throwing a rock at a train, right? It's not going to change the trajectory. So we tend to think of it or I try to think of it more holistically. And you're right, it's not just broadening the pipeline in my estimation, is because what we have, and the statistics are alarming, right? It's a pyramid, and those are going to happen. We're not the only profession, by the way, that suffers with this. Medical profession, engineers, a lot of professions suffer from this. But the steep angle of the pyramid is what's more concerning. And so at each level, whether it's college and then law school training and then opportunities internally, we have to find a way to decrease that angle, because there will be some progress. People are going to go in different directions, and that's okay. So it's widening and changing the angle. And so from what we can do at the same time, in-house, we have a correlating sphere of influence that goes the other direction. So at Goodyear, we can be very intentional, and I think that's our job with the people that work for us in recruiting, in development, in our communications. So when we announce to the broader organization things like the Mansfield Rule and LCLD membership, we're being very intentional about that. But on a personal level, development plans, opportunities, high visibility opportunities is a component that, because of our flat structure and the relatively small size of our group and the opportunities where we have SMEs, we are bringing in people that are earlier mid-career, right? So we aren't just bringing people in on sheer talent and say we'll find a place to put them. We're counting on law firms, quite frankly, to train to that standpoint. But we can move them along. Since in-house counsel, hopefully they're often seen as business partners, you can go cross-functional. You can go, in our organization, we're fortunate that you could go to another region of the world and get an experience there. But if we lose sight, if we just say we'll do our part and then we expect law firms to do their part, and the law firms turn and go to the law schools and say do their part, and law schools say why can't we get more kids in college interested in law school, we have to create some sort of ecosystem. And so while our biggest sphere of influence is internally and then, the spend, quite frankly, for outside counsel, we still try and stay involved in law school mentoring to exactly break down the barriers you're talking about. What does in-house counsel look like? What do they do? Which, quite frankly, is not just an issue for underrepresented. Everybody, nobody really knows what goes on in-house, right? But then at the college level, high school, the Law and Leadership Institute, I know some folks in this room are part of that. It has to be a self-generating ecosystem. So we'll do the part that we can have the most influence on, and that's the people that are enacting right now and the people that we'll hire through the year, which is a handful. We're going to use our sphere of influence for law firms, but unless everybody is connected up and down, quite frankly, I don't know that it ever grabs hold.
Thank you. Andrea, do you have any views on that, or?
So I have a very small department, being one person at the moment. So my sphere of influence internally from a legal standpoint is limited. But, I think thinking about, how I can partner with law firms, I think about diversity, honestly, on every matter. I mean, before I call a law firm, it's a consideration that I have. And how that matter is staffed matters to me. So I think that's one consideration that I can take on a daily basis of where am I giving this work. There are also, I think, a lot of opportunities that we probably haven't fully vetted of how in-house counsel can really partner with law firms to help that process. Can you have an associate be on a call with you? One of the big things is partner and client interaction, right? How do I know how to do that? I don't personally mind if an associate is on a call so that they can start to gain that experience. And so how can we take more opportunities like that to really cultivate and nurture our diverse talent? Again, so they feel supported, I go back to that theme, but also that they're starting to get that exposure that otherwise maybe they don't get until year 5 or until year 8. And we all know that honestly you can't wait that long for them to start to get that exposure. So I really do think it has to be a daily, thought process in everyone's mind about how can I really drive this forward.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that in a minute. I'm interested in hearing, Richik, if you have any views from a law firm kind of retention standpoint, in terms of thoughts you have of things we, should be doing without giving away too many secrets from your firm.
Yeah, well, let me first say, I think we can all agree this is the longest I've ever gone without talking. But one of the things that I would say is that, law firms, we're not really good at changing or creating new metrics. And so we have been using the same tools for a very long time, going to the same places to evaluate the effect of those tools without ever really asking ourselves, why aren't we getting a more diverse group of people to join our law firms? And so one of the things that I think that all of us, law firms, law schools, companies need to do is examine the metrics that we use to evaluate people to be, attorneys. Because now we actually have a pretty good, we certainly have a significant sample size of people to go look at and say, what are the characteristics that made these people successful in these three areas? And what is it that we should then what should we then be looking for in those people for prospective candidates? I tell people all the time that I think it's remarkable how many women and minorities have gone through law school in the first place because of all the things and barriers that they probably experienced just to get to the point that they could say they graduate from law school. And to me, one of the most important characteristics that I look for in a young attorney is resilience and grit. Their ability to kind of, understand that every little thing is not the end of the world, and that there's a longer picture that you need to be looking at, and keep that in mind as you go through. I think women and minorities that get through law school, they have that in abundance. So why aren't I valuing that as much as I'm valuing how they did on a Crim Pro exam, 1 year into law school? So we need to start changing the metrics and the lenses that we're using in evaluating the people that we hire on every level. And then once you get them in, a lot of, one of my friends just became, one of my LCLD fellow classmates is the new chief operating officer of Pizza Hut. And he says that one of the great things about Pizza Hut is that they try to foster a sense of belonging to keep people at Pizza Hut. And that's something that we need to do at law firms, is foster a sense of belonging for everyone. And, I've been at many law firms where we've tried to hire our way into that. We've hired as many diverse attorneys as we could. We've done all this stuff, and people still leave. And so one of the things that we're doing at Dinsmore, and I don't mind giving away this secret because I think everyone should be doing it, is we're trying to diversify our client base so that our clients look like our attorneys and vice versa. So that someone is working with someone that looks like them and helping them build their business and helping them succeed in what they have chosen to do. Just like many majority attorneys have done with companies. That's how, most of the big stories you hear about big client relationships in law firms typically began with so-and-so went to the same law school, high school, or country club. Minorities and women don't have that as much in common, but we do know we still have a lot of common interests that we can be talking about and have that sense of belonging almost immediately when you start having work relationship with them. So we're trying to get more African American companies as our clients, more Asian American companies. To that point, we've created programs with the President's Council. We're trying to expand it to the Hispanic Roundtable and the Asian American Chamber of Commerce, where we're doing pro bono IP work, pro bono corporate work for these companies, so that we can help build them into clients that eventually can pay us. But more importantly, so that our younger attorneys, especially our minority attorneys, are working with people that look like them, and they can get that sense of belonging. So I think that those are the two ways that we need to be, we need to kind of fix things. Is one, we need to work on the front end as far as how we're evaluating candidates, and then once we get them into our places, we need to figure out how to make them feel like they belong. And if that means that we need to take some chances on clients that we traditionally wouldn't, we should. It's not like we haven't done it before. In other instances. We just need to kind of use some of the plumbing that has worked successfully for certain groups of people, use it for us. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel then, you're just making it so that you're just kind of changing the direction that something is going. And that's a lot easier change than it is to break down old systems and make new systems.
Excellent, thank you.
I saved all of that up this whole time.
I knew you were going to do that, so that's why I waited to call on you for a while. Matthew, go ahead.
Just jump in. So I don't personally have any law firm experience, but I do have some statistics as well. These are a little more out of date than Professor Adamson's, so I apologize. But it's in terms of retention, right? I mean, there's a lot of introspection that I think still can be done. You take a look at the statistics. If you break down the partner to associate ratio by race at major law firms, so generally, if you sort of use white as 1-to-1, right, there are approximately 55 to 60% as many black partners as you would expect given the numbers of black associates. There are approximately 55% as many Latina partners as you would expect based on the number of associates. There are only 22% as many Asian partners as you would expect based on the number of Asian associates. And so the next question obviously has to be why, and how do we fix that, right? Is it because there's something in the messaging at the law school level that sort of causes folks to go sort of for the paycheck and then have an experience that causes them to leave? Is it because there's still some ingrained bias in terms of the stereotypes of Asian Americans as sort of more subservient and not good leaders? How do those two things interact with each other? How do we attack all angles of that problem at once? And of course, I don't have all of the answers to that, unfortunately, or I would not be teaching at a law school right now, but these are the kinds of questions that I think that folks can ask internally and ask sort of amongst law firms, amongst sort of corporations that have these in-house departments. What do we do about this?
So we talked, in line with this, we've talked about, and I think Andrea was talking about, kind of client expectations for diverse attorney work teams for law firms and things like that. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about, in light of some of this conversation, what are firms doing well in regard to that, and what are they not doing well? And are there things they should be doing that are going to set people up really for more of this long-term success we're talking about, which I want to talk a little bit more about that after this.
So what are they doing well? I would say personally I feel that there are some firms that you don't really have to have a conversation about diversity. When you call them on a matter and they reach back out to you and say, here's who I'm thinking about staffing your case with, it is thoughtful. Whether it be, here's someone who's new to this practice area, but I think it would be good for them to have exposure to this. It's just innate that, we've made a connection, they understand me, I understand them. I think that law firms are doing a good job, and some law firms are doing a good job, at least with having the conversation about it. Whether that be I'm reaching out to them and I'm saying specifically, I'd really like you to come back with a diverse group of attorneys to work on this matter for me. And they're upfront, whether good or bad, to say, great, I'm going to do that, or I can't do that, and here's why, and here's how we're working on it. Then we're having a good conversation. So I think either you're coming to the table kind of fully formed, or you're willing to have a discussion about it. I think what's not going well, and it happens more often than you think, is that you say, I want to have a diverse group of attorneys work on this matter, or let's talk about your firm's diversity statistics, and you get radio silence. And if you don't write back in a day or two or three, I might not know exactly what the reason is, but I can come up with a lot of assumptions as to what's going on, behind the scenes to get a response. And so I just feel that to do it well, regardless of whether, your firm's statistics are, perfect at the time that we're having this discussion, is to just be honest about it. I need to help too. It's not all on the firms. I think we've been talking about that. So have an honest conversation about, I don't have any, minority associates on our corporate team, but, here's what we can do about it. Here's what we're thinking about doing about it. How can you help? I think that's where the conversation really starts to move forward.
No, and I would agree. Look, nobody ever disagrees, right? When we present our point of view and our expectations, nobody disagrees or pushes back, right? But how it plays out is very much as she said. They don't seem to be able to deliver. And look, I have some empathy, because you can't put, if you say you have X amount of resources and you overstaff it and you put somebody who is just, I mean, we don't want someone symbolic either. Come in on the first meeting, the client meeting, then we never see them again. That's not actually moving the ball. That's right. I mean, that's false. But I'll put it to the firms of something I can't reconcile is, hey, lack of experienced attorneys, because they also get the push from people like us of, but we also have to make sure that we are getting, experienced attorneys who are bringing, added value to the project and all that. We have budgets to manage. The reconciliation between we don't have enough experienced folks, and so we can't staff anybody, to me says, and because everybody is asking. Okay, so if you have some stars in your firm and they're on X amount of projects, you're not going to be able to allocate them everywhere. Well, it's one or the other. That means you're oversubscribed on people offering opportunity. So I don't know how to reconcile those two things. If we can't get the folks the right experience because of some other institutional issues of, relationships, we've got to move forward, but we're at the same time asking, bring them on. There's an oversubscription to opportunities that we're trying to provide, and I don't know how to help fill that other than, again, as you're bringing in large swaths of talent, I would say I hope you're a little bit closer to saying broaden that aperture on what talent can translate into, has been talked about a lot. But those two things can't coexist long term.
I think that some of this gets again to, and I'll reuse the term again, the sense of belonging of attorneys and law firms, but that also gets to the sense of the assigning attorney and who they think they belong with. And by that I mean, I've been doing this work for a very long time. I've been a law student or a lawyer now for more than half my life. I've been a minority my entire life. And I can tell you that not a lot of things have changed about me over that time, and also not a lot of things have changed about the legal profession in that time. This entire time, we've been talking about how we need to have more minority associates, more minority partners, and more clients are now saying we want more and more minority attorneys, more and more minority partners. If I was to believe all of that, you would think that in law firms, the busiest associates in a law firm would be all the minority associates. You would think that the minority partners would be the most valued commodity on the legal market that you could find. And neither of those two things are the case. And in fact, when you look at how hours are broken out at law firms, we have to go make sure that the minority attorneys are getting as much work as the other attorneys. So somewhere in there, something is broken. And I think a lot of that is because I don't think it's some sort of vast conspiracy. I just think that people default to what is easy. And so they started working with someone they felt comfortable with. And that comfort may have come from immediately having a shared background. Immediately we both went to case law school, or more often than not in this town, we both went to St. Ed's or St. Ignatius. And I know their family, and I know everything about them. And I know everything about this more often than not male before I even talk to them, because I have the exact same background. And that formed that sense of belonging. And so then when they're making their teams, they're not spending a ton of time evaluating the other people on the bench. They're like, what's the easiest thing that I can do to move on to the next thing on my list? And that's what we need to start breaking, is making sure that everyone gets to be on the team, everyone gets to play, everyone gets an opportunity to show what they can do. And if we have to manufacture and make it intentional to do that, then that's what we have to do. I actually think, though, I'm on, we talked about it before, I'm on the executive committee for LCLD, and one of the things that we just put out to our members is a thing that we're calling Pathways to Equity, which is a lot of our in-house attorneys looked and said, listen, we're not seeing a lot of equity partners amongst minority attorneys. And one of the things that they were putting out in this, and it's a 12-page thing, which I have somewhere in my iPad, so I can share it with people. But I would rather share it with people and companies that are LCLD members. So you can have it, Dave. Eden needs to do some work before they can get it. No, I'm kidding. But what I'm saying is that one of the things that we've been talking with people about is you need to start asking questions about how is it that credit for my work is going to be apportioned? And is the minority attorney going to get some of that credit? Because quite honestly, if a law firm is getting work because they put together a diverse team, then those diverse people on that team should be getting part of that credit. It's not always been that case, and I've told this story many times. Many years ago, I worked at a law firm where a partner left the law firm, and about 3 weeks later, I got a call from accounting. I was a third-year associate, so I get a call from accounting, and I'm like, what do I know from accounting? I'm a third year. I know to get my time in. And they were like, well, I see that you had billing responsibilities for all of these matters. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, you were listed as having substantive responsibilities for all these clients. And then it turned out it was this gentleman that had left the firm and had listed me in all those things. And when we looked at it a little bit more, we found out that that company was incentivizing the use of minorities on certain matters, but apparently didn't particularly care whether a minority was actually working on those matters, nor did that partner care that I was doing anything on them. We've come a long way since then. I don't think that could actually happen anymore, but we can still be more, law firms need to be more transparent about how we give out equity and how we give out credit, and companies need to be more proactive in asking those questions so that we are more transparent.
Brian, you had something you wanted to add?
Especially particularly with regards to what Andrea and David said, reminded me of something I heard Stan Ball say a couple of weeks ago or about a month ago when he came to speak at Case Western. And it goes to this issue of inclusiveness and this notion of the importance of creating expectations around inclusiveness as leaders of organizations. When it's all well and good when you staff client matters with minority or historically underrepresented members of your law firm, but what's the impact? What is the ripple effect of that appointment on the relationships within that firm? And how does the bias, expressed or unconscious bias, work itself amongst those minorities and their peers? Thinking about how do you as an organization manage as leaders of the organizations, as team, as department leaders, as heads of organizations, the fallouts, the resentments, potential resentments, the potential blowback that minority student, or minority associate might experience in those things. And so it's really important to think about the social and relational impacts of everything you do internally. And this goes to the whole thing about belonging as well, and this notion of creating inclusive environments, and the fact that it comes from leadership. And it comes from team leaders and department leaders, and looking at assessing the inclusive practices of your organization, the ones that are tacit, the ones that are written in policy and your hiring practices, the ones that you put on your website. What are we doing? What are we saying around those things? Doing that assessment. Articulating the expectations around inclusiveness to everybody in the organization. What are your expectations? Third, modeling that inclusive behavior. And then finally, reinforcing the desired behaviors around inclusiveness. And I think that those are broad categories, but I think those are 4 important steps that any organization, ours included, the law schools included, in trying to create a more inclusive environment. And even that's not enough, because you also then have to figure out how do we retain people and allow them, create the circumstances where they can advance. And this maybe goes to one of Rich's point, is thinking about succession plans, right? What happens when a partner retires, right? Who does that book of business go to, and what are the factors that go into deciding who gets that business and who gets those opportunities to lead client matters, right? Looking at and evaluating and assessing everything structurally in these firms and organizations, including, once again, these institutions, require us to take hard looks at why are we doing the things we do, and how can we be doing things differently if this is, in fact, the goal for ourselves.
I think it's a great conversation, and I think, Rich, Brian, you kind of really led me to the next topic I was going to want to talk a little bit more time about, was the equity partner issue, right? I think we heard Judge Oliver talk about, the challenge with equity partner statistics. I think he said 2%, of partners are black partners, for example, was one of his statistics. The numbers are very low. And I think you've been talking about some of those type of things that we might do to get somebody to the point that they are more successful internally to the law firm and then have that opportunity. But I'm wondering other thoughts on the panel. Anyone else have any thoughts about what's causing that dynamic? And I think we probably addressed a lot of that also, but just what things should people be doing differently maybe to try to get more opportunities, which ultimately, when I talk about these, the life cycle of a diverse associate or diverse attorney becoming an equity partner, at least in the law firm world, is, kind of, the end game, right? Any thoughts?
I mean, I think unless Brandon cut a really good deal, I'm probably the only person that has equity in a law firm on this panel. So I can say that a lot of that conversation, again, comes to, a lot of success for, I think, diverse attorneys comes from the diverse attorney being a little bit audacious as far as asking for opportunities and asking for information. And so I went and asked, equity partners in our law firm, what did you do to become an equity partner? I kind of think that other partners, other people in our law firm, someone came and talked to them about that. I don't think that we have enough people that talk to minority attorneys about these are the things that are expected of you. These are the things that you need to do. This is how I got to where I am. Let me find, let's figure out someone that you can model your career after in order to get to where they are. So I think that's a first building block that we need to come, is kind of explain to everybody and be transparent about what needs to happen. Because at many law firms, it's, first of all, we start off at some places with a two-tiered system where they won't tell you exactly who's an equity partner, who's not an equity partner, which it's really one of those open secret things. But then, they certainly then don't tell you the difference between how you become an equity partner versus an income partner thing. So again, we need to kind of explain every piece of this process to everybody, so so there's an understanding of what needs to be done and how you do it. And I think that's the first step. And I think the second step is, again, encourage clients and encourage law firms to introduce the minority attorneys to the clients early and have them grow together. Most client relationships didn't happen because of, I met someone at a conference on day one and day three, they sent me all their business. Most of it started on day one, I met an associate or one of my friends from law school, or I met someone that was young in that institution, and on day 612, they were finally probably had an opportunity to give business, and they remembered all the nice things that I had done for them up until that point, and they gave me that opportunity. And we need to start putting minority associates into positions where they can succeed just as often as we do it with other associates. And we need to make sure that they're at as many tables as they can be and they get to go to as many meetings as they need to. And if that sometimes means calling ahead to a client and explaining why, you're gonna have one more attorney at this table than you might have thought, and we're not gonna charge you for them, that's fine. I'm happy to eat that, to get someone that experience in front of them, because in the long run, my law firm is gonna build a better relationship with that company. And that's how you build equity in not only your career, but also in a law firm, is that you have a lot of good relationships, but it takes a lot of work from everybody.
Yeah, and I guess I wonder, because of some of the comments that were made earlier about going into law school, to diverse attorneys even know what it means to be an equity, like you said, even know what it means, then it's something they might even be wanting to do. Is it something that's even on the radar early enough in the process, maybe?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So I think coming into a firm, a lot of it feels very opaque, right? What it means to advance at a firm, why I would want to be partner, what does it mean to be partner, what does it mean to be an equity partner, and how that differs, other than it seems that there's some sort of politics to all of it, right? And it just, the entire process seems very opaque. And I think to Rich's point, I think it's important to provide some transparency. And I think this is not just for the diverse attorneys. I think for all associates, they all go through a similar process of trying to understand where they are, where they fit in, how they fit in. And I think all associates go through a certain kind of feeling out process of where they are, trying to find that belonging. But I think what we all need to understand is that if it affects everyone, it's going to affect your diverse attorneys more. because there's already going to be so many built-in issues already, right? There's going to be more built-in imposter syndrome. There's going to be the removal that we talked earlier that really happens, the self-selection stuff, right? That's going to happen more. So if it's a general associate problem, I can almost guarantee that your diverse attorneys are going to feel even more isolated because they can't relate to the other equity partners that are there. Maybe they don't feel the same connection to go in and have those conversations that Richard stated that he had, to go in and ask these questions, or even know that there are questions that they should be asking, right? I think the idea of belonging is so important, and I think it's going to be the biggest driving factor in keeping in any associate, and especially diverse associates. And I think a lot of what Rich talked about having diverse clients. Earlier, one of the other panelists talked about defining moments, and these standing ovation moments. I think that is extremely important. And I can speak personally, right? These moments that you have where you feel like, okay, I actually do belong, right? I actually am a good attorney. I actually can do this long term. Those are the things that you remember when a recruiter calls you, right? Those are the things that you think about when some other place decides to throw you a lot more money, right? Because at the end of the day, the money's going to chase itself no matter where you go, right? But you have to find somewhere where you belong, and if a firm can provide that, then you're going to carry that a lot more than if you don't have it. You're going to stick with that firm. You're going to want to stick with that firm if you feel like that firm is not just family in a general sense, but that I feel important to them, and I think that they value me. And so I think that it's important to be intentional. I think we've seen all of these statistics that we rattled off, right? Whatever we've been doing up until this point is not working. And if we assume that we can just continue what we're doing as we're doing it, it's not going to work. And even if it's not enough. Someone earlier talked about being anti-racist, right? It's not enough to just not be overtly racist. You have to be vehemently and vigilantly anti-racist. You have to look at all of these things to say, not only is it actively hurting, but is it even passively hurting, or is it actively helping the diverse attorneys and the diverse talent that we have? And if it's not, then we need to reevaluate. Because if you raise the floor, everyone gets raised, right? And that's not necessarily from a talent perspective, right? Because I'm not saying diverse attorneys are the floor, we're certainly not. But from an opportunity standpoint, we kind of are. So if you raise the opportunities of the diverse talent, everyone else should follow.
I would follow on what you're saying about that intentionality, and again, at the center of the area where you have that influence, the communication, the transparency for people to develop is really paramount, and it's something that I think we continue to learn, and it's something that, especially folks in leadership positions, and I'll just say, candidly, this is actually an area where I recently, definitely learned some lessons, because in an organization, while in law firms, there's usually, well, who's going to partner? It's the one step, and you can say who didn't make it, and that goes. But in an organization, sometimes you are making multiple moves. It's a domino effect, and so someone goes here, and then there's a piece here. And when you are putting that together, if you are thinking of everyone in that plan, but you don't do a good enough communicating, then what happens is, one, someone may not understand what the leadership was talking about when they made those decisions. But two, in the silence, if you have the void, it's going to be filled with the assumption of bias, right? And so that's why it's just as critical. So you have to be, you may think that, boy, we had all these plans and the pieces fit, and you don't stop to think of making sure that it's getting cascaded out, it's being communicated properly, that it's all within development along all lines, then, personally I looked in the mirror and said, well, that makes a total sense why someone would come to a conclusion that wasn't intended. And you have to do that sort of every day, step out of the leadership and say, if you were on the receiving end, how would that play out? So I think it goes for companies as well.
Yes. And I do think this ties directly back into the conversation we had about recruiting as well, right? It's, I think there are a lot of folks who come out of law school and go to a firm because they think it's what they should be doing, with no intention necessarily of trying to make equity partner, right? It may not be something that's interesting to them, right? Meanwhile, you may have folks who are not caught by sort of the traditional sort of recruitment metrics who would really be interested in that, right? Somebody who has maybe a 2.7, but like will go to the partner and be like, I really like this work, what can I do? They're not even getting in the door in the first place, right? And so I think there are a lot of ways in which all of these sort of separate questions that we've been talking about need to really be assessed, not only on their own, but how the sort of structural interactions between them sort of have an effect, right? Just disparate impact ultimately exists because of these structures, right? Whether or not the Supreme Court believes it does, but ultimately, right, a lot of what we're talking about is not intentional, and it really can only be fixed by being intentional in the other direction, as we were talking about anti-racism, for example.
Thank you. So we're pretty much at the end of our time, and I'm going to take a risk, though, and ask if anybody has a question for this panel, because I think, obviously, very insightful group, and I think they have a lot of history and knowledge with everything. So does anyone have a question they would like to ask? If not, we'll head to break, but just give a second to see if there's any takers. Okay, well, thank you very much. Oh, did we have one? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. It would be helpful if you wouldn't mind.
I am not a lawyer, but I'm a mom, and I'm comparing and contrast everything that everyone's saying. Mrs. Horton, you said that you didn't have parents who were lawyers. Matthew, you went to an affinity group and decided really quickly, like, this might not be for me. Dave, you said that there needs to be an ecosystem for people to fast track to law. Richik, you talked about how people typically do business with who they know and trust, so if they went to the same schools. Brandon, I saw you last time I was here. I'm so proud of you. And then Brian, you talked about what I perceive is when you stand up for yourself, some of the barriers that can manifest as a result of talking about diversity and inclusion. My son wants to be a lawyer now, and he's 10. He doesn't want to be a lawyer, I think, because it's the cool thing to do. He knows nothing about law firms. It's what he's experiencing in his school. And so my question to you is, at what point did you say, I'm going to be a lawyer? How old were you when that happened? Because what I keep hearing back and forth, what everyone is saying, is that there's not a system, and so I'm from a different background, so system for us is save you time, energy, and money to get more diversity in this field, because most black boys, and in my experience of what I'm seeing with my son, they're doomed at kindergarten. The heart and soul of education is taken out almost immediately because their teachers don't look like them. And they're not doing the hard work, and they're not thinking about diversity every day like you do to brush your teeth. And so they're projecting some of their feelings and thoughts, and kids are receiving it. So no, most black kids, including me, aren't thinking when they were in school, I'm gonna be a lawyer. So how old were you when you came up with that career path?
Thank you.
I'll start. I think I was around 8-ish, and my mom will say, I went to her and said, I'm either gonna be a lawyer or a psychiatrist. I think I'm both, actually, in the profession that I chose. And it wasn't really based on anything. I wasn't looking at family members that were lawyers. I think it goes back to the comment about some of the mystique around being a lawyer. But I just really held on to that kind of through high school and certainly through college, and tried to figure out, I know I've always been saying this is what I want to do, but is it actually what I want to do? And you just have to find resources outside, and it's not easy. I mean, I can't look back and say, okay, in middle school I had this person who was a mentor to me and helped me figure out what it means to be a lawyer. It was probably parts and pieces, and very small parts and pieces, all the way through, passing the bar, quite honestly, before I really had a support system that could help me understand what it really means to practice law.
Yeah, I realized that, I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer after I got my first semester of law school grades. I applied basically as a backup plan. I ended up going and really... so I was actually, I was applying simultaneously to PhD programs in music. And so really leaning into the stereotype. But but I think, right, I had other sort of forms of privilege that allowed me to sort of exist simultaneously in those worlds, right? In a way that that somebody who doesn't have maybe some of those economic privileges, the sort of law school process might not be as kind to them along the way, right? And this is, I think, part of what we as a profession need to really sort of do, not just, right, law firms, not just in-house counsel, but like also those organizations with the influence that they have monetarily and otherwise on law schools as well.
Yeah, well, similar to Matthew. I mean, I was my, I guess, senior year of college when I realized I was not going to be a professional athlete, and the last 4 years of a sociology degree left fairly limited options. And look, I mean, different position for me, but also, I came from a pretty challenging economic background, and so it wasn't really something that popped out when I was a kid either. But when I was talking about the ecosystem that goes down into the schools and primary, that it's not about a lawyer track from my perspective. It's about those folks believing in themselves that they can, right? I'll tell you, if the time that we spend as an organization, as a profession in those areas has an equal impact on people going to medical school or engineering or any sort of advance, I can hold myself as a professional, or anything that they think is outside of what where they're represented normally, then it's a positive. That's the base that we are interested in building, rather than just the lawyer pipeline. So I think that system is bigger.
Yeah, I don't recall having like an epiphany moment. I remember that in looking and trying to understand what I did well, I knew that I was pretty good at analyzing something, understanding it, and able to explain it to other people, and then defend a point. And so it kind of congealed for me then when I started. I mean, I wasn't really good at sports. I played a lot of sports, was not very good at them. But I was really good at the forensic sorts of things, like debate, extempore speaking, things like that. So that's where those things kind of clicked. And then I sat down, once I figured those things out, and I was like, what careers do I really have that focus on this skill set? And in my head, I had narrowed it down to advertising and the law. And I remember I did not like the show 30-something, which is about a bunch of people that were in advertising. So then I decided that maybe law was the better way to go.
So for me, I decided that I wanted to be an attorney when I was 13. It was my first year of high school, and my team competed in the mock trial tournament competition, and we won. So it was great, and I felt like I was good at it. But more than that, that year also was one of the first years of the 3 R's program, which is still going throughout the city. And which I now help with, right? And I now coach the mock trial team at the school that I graduated from. And I think it's very important because for me, what was most important was that there were attorneys from Tucker Ellis at the time who came in and decided that I was worth their time. And I think that goes to David's point about what it means to believe in yourself. And so I think it's great that your son already wants to be an attorney, right? And whether he decides to or not, whether he holds on to that or not, but I think having some sort of purpose, right, to hold on to push you forward, I think is important. And I think mentorship is really important because I agree there still aren't nearly enough resources for us out here. But I think mentorship can be a gap, right? Having someone who you can call, right? I was fortunate enough to have even some of the people in this room to call to say, hey, I think I want to do this thing. What should I do? What should I major in, right? I majored in theater, because my mentors told me I can major in whatever I wanted to and go to law school. And in fact, it might be better to not do something that's traditional because my application might stand out, right? So those things are important. So my advice would be definitely keep cultivating that and, find mentors, right? Me included. So I'll give you my card.
Yeah, it's to be admired. Your son knows what he wants at this stage, and just to continue to encourage him to be curious, to investigate, and surround him with people. Continue to surround him with people who are going to give him positive reinforcement. Because for young black boys and black men out here, there's a lot to contend with. There's not only the issues of the imposter syndrome, but there are people who are actively, whether intentional or not, actively engaged in making sure that they don't succeed. I didn't want to be a lawyer until I got to college because I thought that going to law school and being a lawyer was just one thing I wanted to do. I wanted to be an architect since I was 5 years old. And went to college and realized, no, I don't want to be an architect. And but I didn't have lawyers around me in our families, in our immediate family, my neighborhoods, growing up or anything like that. I was a welfare baby. We lived in the projects. Mothers, we survived on $101 of food stamps every month and some cash assistance. And just there just weren't people in my place and space where that I lived that was given that kind of encouragement. But there were mentors. My parents were my biggest fans, of course, and then some of my teachers, right? Then getting into these spaces, there's still that imposter syndrome, feeling like you belong, whether you belong or not. I was dealing with issues of intersectionality, being both black and gay. 2 strikes at the very least. And so working through those things, not only in high school and college, but in law school and even in law firms, there's just going to be challenges. But as long as he's surrounded, he has a strong sense of self-worth, knows who he is determined, have good people surrounding him and mentoring him, and you can count me as one of those if you like, he's going to be all right.
Thank you all for sharing. I think I was actually glad. It was good to hear everyone's experience, and I know there's always somebody that goes off over schedule, and that's me today. But Kim, are we going to do like a 5-minute break or? Yeah. So we'll do a 5-minute break, and thanks so much to the panel. I mean, excellent conversation.
All right, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. You all will have plenty of time to get to chat with one another and at the cocktail reception after the program. So save your thoughts and your conversations, and we'll take it up to the mezzanine at the end of the afternoon. Thanks. So next I'd like to introduce to you Ken James. Ken is General Counsel and Director of Governmental Affairs at GE Lighting, a Savant company. Ken has experience working in global Fortune 500 and mid-sized companies, as well as startups, private equity, IPO, JV, and M&A environments. Prior to joining GE Lighting, Ken served as General Counsel at Associated Materials in the Cleveland-Akron area and as Senior Counsel at Pernod Ricard in New York City. He also served as Vice President and Assistant General Counsel at Diageo, and as Senior Division Counsel at Borden Dairy Company. We welcome Ken, and we look forward to his thoughtful comments about his experience and his initiatives at GE Lighting.
Thank you. Kimberly, thank you. I've got to wonder, though. Let's see. We opened with a federal district court judge. He didn't need any support. Then we had the Eaton team, and you guys basically knocked it out of the park. Then we had the panel of 6 people, and now you have me. I did decide, as an exercise of rationality, that I would sit rather than stand so I can be seen. But, I'm wondering why I'm on this panel. And Andrea, thank you. You pointed out that you have a very small law department. Mine is small as well. I wanted to talk this afternoon about what diversity, equality, and inclusion looks like for a small legal department, which is mine. I thought I would initially not use slides, but not using slides might result in the revocation of my citizenship as a corporate lawyer, so I elected to make a few. Very briefly, many of you know GE Lighting. The GE Lighting business goes back to Thomas Edison. It's been around since 1889. We are a global leader in lighting products, and that's great. However, we're no longer part of General Electric Company. In 2020, General Electric Company sold the lighting business to Savant Systems, Inc. So we're evolving what we look like. From a company perspective, we have operations in the US, Canada, and a very large facility in China. So we're not a global business, but we go all over the world, I would say. What does our transition from big GE look like? Or as I refer to, how did we separate from the mothership? And what was GE? Well, obviously, even since we left, that company has changed. But what did it mean from the legal department, the legal support provided to the business? Well, GE had a tremendous scale for legal services. One of the in-company jokes, which was probably almost true, was that GE was a large law department with manufacturing capacity. But they had resources. Much like, I think, Stan and your team, GE was able to track and record results. We had numerous panels on minority business enterprises, including law firms. We had internal practice groups that would encourage best practice sharing about how do we do better. And quite frankly, the GC of the company, who, when I was part of GE, Mike Holston, sent out a very strong letter to all of the law firms that represented GE, reminding them that he and individual legal leaders in the businesses were going to actively look at the degree to which they had developed diversity programs in the services they provided to General Electric Company. Needless to say, for my business, for my legal team, the post-GE world is very different. We're looking at us now, we're a small business. We hope to grow bigger, and we've got plans to do so, but we're not General Electric Company. We don't have the leverage that General Electric Company had, perhaps, at securing cooperative behavior from our law firms. That is not to say that the law firms I presently work with have not been accommodating. That is not to say that I do consider the composition of the teams they offer to me or the composition of the law firm to be important. But again, I'm on the buy side of the equation, and for most law firms, I'm a mid-sized client. I'm certainly appreciative of the law firms in the Cleveland market, such as Calfee. I value the service that they provide to me, and certainly having practiced in the Northeast and the New York metro area, I value the reasonableness of the rates that Cleveland law firms make available to me. The challenge for me is, how do I help move the needle on diversity? And that's hopefully, I'm really here to ask for your help to help me understand how I might be able to do that. But first, let's take a look at, my big team. It's me plus 3 lawyers supporting the business in the key areas, obviously, intellectual property. I've talked to a couple of folks in the audience who are intellectual property lawyers and told them how much joy that area brings to me. Well, no, I didn't really say that, did I? But, you know, a core function for our business that we support. Labor and employment, well, if you got more than 3 people, you need that kind of support because it can go sideways very quickly. And then another lawyer who focuses on general business issues. A small team, very effective, very supportive of the business. What do we do? You know, again, what does my legal spend look like? What are my buy opportunities? Where can I go for support? I said how much I liked intellectual property. Well, it consumes about 85% of my budget. And that includes prosecution, which is not the big spend, and litigation, which is. Transactions, we actually do some, about 10% of my budget. And surprisingly, and knock on wood, litigation does not account for a large part of my spend. And that includes all the other stuff, government relations, et cetera. And I won't tell you the amount, but because my CEO gets mad when I talk about how much money I want from him. It's not a small spend, but it's not on the level of a Goodyear, of an Eaton, and you guys can have fun with that. But again, that's the kind of client we represent. Now, what does DEI look like to me? Well, I start by hopefully saying that my team evidences a commitment to it. And to give you a little background, when I joined GE as their general counsel, the GE lighting business was in the process of separating into 2 separate business units. One serving the consumer channel and the other serving the commercial and industrial channel. Because of the relative revenue base of both businesses, the commercial industrial channel got most of the lawyers. The lighting business was left with 1 lawyer and 1 compliance manager. When I came in, the conversation I had with my CEO was, what do I think we need to properly support the business? Which gets you back to what I presented before. 3 lawyers, here are the disciplines we're going to cover, and a general counsel who will try to understand what they're doing and help them do it. But my team, I've got my 2 most senior lawyers are both women. They have over 20 years plus law firm experience, and they both come from Cleveland-based law firms, so we have an affinity there. I have the other lawyer is a male, more junior, 7 or 8 years of law firm experience. You have me, and I sometimes amazed because I have been in-house counsel for going on 38 years now, which went by very quickly, so I kind of provide the broad overview of what we do, what we need to cover. But again, how do we express our commitment to DEI in selection and retention of outside counsel? It's a challenge, quite frankly, because if you go back to what I said about my budget for outside legal spend, 85% of that spend is in my IP realm, and it's the right split. But again, what's my present state? Well, I'm glad to say that I have a long-standing relationship with a minority-owned law firm that does all of our patent prosecution work. And it just feels right. We've worked with Ted for a number of years. He understands our business. It just works, and we're happy with that. I think in the firms that have represented me in various matters, I think gender diversity has been good. It feels organic, and I think it's organic because of the changing demographics in law firms. I'm old enough to recall that when I started law school, probably 10% of my class were women. And certainly we've seen that increase year over year. So the fact that I call a firm and they recommend a female lawyer to manage my product is a non-event. I enjoy working with all of the lawyers I've worked with. But it's also challenging. I'm having less success in having my matters supported by minority counsel. Now, I would say that in the IP realm, where, quite frankly, you'd expect a high level of sophistication, I've actually had more success in having diverse lawyers. And when I say diverse here, and it's not meant to be pejorative, I'm excluding women because they're their own category, and I value that as the diversity metric. But we also have to look at, are we looking at other underrepresented groups? You know, we have certainly African Americans, we have Asian Americans, we have Latinos, we have Native Americans. Again, and the list probably goes on because there are so many underrepresented groups in our profession. To actually get them assigned to your matters may represent some degree of difficulty. But again, I think the gender diversity is workforce. The ethnic diversity is a little more challenging, but I found by circumstance that I found more ethnic diversity in my IP representation, which frankly surprised me, but it pleases me, and I'm happy for that. And, you know, there's another category, diversity, that we haven't really talked a great deal about, and obviously you don't poll people, but, you know, the LGBT community is represented in my supplier base. It's by self-identification. It's not by me saying, are you, should you be? But again, I go back to the point that for me, minority diversity is harder. And I think what I've seen, the conversation I've heard today, is that, and this is anecdotal, but it seems like there's a high concentration of minority representation in the litigation practices. And if I don't do a lot of non-IP litigation, I'm perhaps missing the opportunities to work with those folks. I do transactions. And it's interesting because I'm sometimes pleased to see, even if they're not representing me, minority lawyers on the other side of the table. It's just, it gives me a good feeling. The challenge for me is, and I think, you know, several people have cited data about minority participation in this profession. The percentages in and of themselves are relatively small. You combine that with the dispersion of those individuals across I don't even have the number of law firms. I'm not a big fan of Antonin Scalia, but he did have one phrase to describe big law. He said, tall building lawyers. Well, there are a lot of tall building lawyers in law firms. Finding the ones that I need is a challenge in and of itself, but identifying the minority, the diverse lawyers within those tall building law firms is a challenge for me. How do I potentially overcome that challenge? Well, first I start with, you know, what's my hierarchy of needs? The nature of the representation. If I am looking for a firm to represent me in an ITC proceeding regarding intellectual property, it becomes a relatively small group because those of you who are IP practitioners can appreciate and understand that the ITC practice is a subset of IP practice, and the number of firms who are really specialists in it is a relatively small number. But again, that's where I found my most success in retaining diverse lawyers. Surprising, and I don't know why. But when I'm looking for representation, what do I know about the firm? And part of it there is, do I know enough about the firm to know that they have a commitment to some level of diversity? Is that commitment reflected in the lawyers in the firm? And I can determine that from one of two ways. Certainly, if I have a personal relationship with a partner in the firm, I can ask. But you know, how do we make friends now? We go to Facebook. Well, how do we find out what a firm looks like? Well, firms are, you know, web pages, websites are excellent tools for kind of scanning to see, okay, there is some diversity here. Maybe it's not in the matter that I need, but at least the firm is directionally going in the right direction. What do I need to help me get better in diversifying the people who represent me in matters? And this is really where I need this group's help. The lawyers who are in law firms, the diverse lawyers who are in law firms. I'm willing to give minority partners a chance to introduce themselves to me, introduce themselves to my team. I do get unsolicited calls, cold calls, and I'm willing to entertain a conversation. If they're not in my wheelhouse, which is largely transactions, I may ask them to talk to one of my other lawyers whose specialty they may represent, get feedback. Is it going to be an immediate bonding and yes, you're part of the team? No. But if you don't say hello, you can't start a conversation. And to give you an example, I have a local lawyer, minority partner in a law firm, who contacted my CEO. And he introduced himself as, we are in the same fraternity. And my CEO said, well, fine, talk to my general counsel. Have I retained him yet? No. Have we had multiple conversations, met for coffee, talked about his practice? I'm beginning to know him. If there's an opportunity that suits either him or his firm, I'm going to call him. Say, I've got a matter, and I do this all the time. I ask multiple firms, give me a proposal on what you're going to do for me. Tell me who's going to work on it. Tell me how much it's going to cost. I will make a decision. But he took the affirmative step of reaching. That's an overlay from law school. I teach, and I tend to go on, so I set the alarm to shut myself off. And I was really concerned that I would run out of things to say, but apparently I'm my usual self. And what you don't know about me is that I'm really an introvert, and that's the truth. But I do feel a passion about diversity in the practice. I do feel a passion about doing what I can with my legal spend, with my legal team, to encourage diversity in the practice. And anyone here who wants to reach out to me to tell me, hey, I'm a partner in a law firm, I'd like to talk to you, I'm more than open to it. What can you do to make yourself more appealing to me? Well, certainly talk to me. But simple law firm marketing 101. Maybe I should be on your mailing list to find out what your firm is doing. Check in with me periodically. Just find out what's going on in my business. Do I have any issues? Can you help me? Maybe there's a training program that I need to put on. Follow my business. Something as simple, and I think many firms do this, is tracking potential clients and potential clients. Did I get sued today? Sometimes you get points for being the first person to tell me I've got another mess on my hands. I may not select you, but I certainly appreciate that you're paying attention to me. I don't think anything that I've said is earth-shattering. I don't have statistics to track, but it's a way of doing business. It's a way of presenting yourself to me, to smaller law firms, to make inroads, to really present yourself to us. I think that's the most important, most effective thing to do. With social media today, people, they find me all the time on LinkedIn. They want to link in and talk to me. Some I accept, many I ignore for a variety of reasons. I was laughing at a friend of mine. When I was in law school, every the first-year student stood in front of a camera that should have been used at the BMV, took a photo, and was actually put in a Facebook. And I was talking to a friend and said, I still have my first-year law school Facebook. She says, you had Facebook in law school? No, I digress. I have no sense of humor. But again, I'm running through my time. I hope my comments have illustrated, I think, the challenge that perhaps smaller law firms, smaller in-house practices face, the opportunities that we may present, and again, how best to approach us. Call me, talk to me, email me, introduce yourself. Start a relationship is probably the best advice I can give you. And again, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone who's in a law firm. If your prospective client doesn't know you, they're never going to call you. I'd be more than happy to take any questions you may have. I don't have great answers, but I'll try. Yes, ma'am. You know, I apologize. The echo and aging ears make it hard.
What do you see your role in GE is to advance diversity throughout the business?
Well, I guess part of it is it's risk management. I know that if we are not properly managing our people, we are not doing the analysis of staffing, hiring, and retention decisions, it could come back to be a problem. I think by the fact that I have a seat at the leadership table, gives me a voice. It gives me an opportunity to speak when maybe more sensitivity is required. It certainly gives me agency to present opportunities for diverse people, whether they be lawyers who want to represent the business or introducing diverse people as potential candidates for other opportunities. I think as in-house counsel, we're charged with two things. We're supposed to enable the business leaders to accomplish their objectives. We're also supposed to provide very real-time risk management advice. As another friend I had, he describes it as making sure we don't end up in a ditch. And ending up in a ditch can be, are we tone deaf to diversity? Think about an organization that's a sales force. What does that sales force look like? Have we injected enough diversity into our hiring and retention practices in our sales force? In our marketing organization, we're speaking to consumers. Are we capturing the voices that understand our consumers by way of, do we have the right people in our marketing department? Have we retained the right agencies to speak to our customers? So it's a broad question, but I describe the legal function as I've grown to understand it, we get involved in all parts of the business. Sometimes we're asked to get involved. Sometimes we inject ourselves into it. But I haven't been fired yet, so it must work. No further questions. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak this afternoon. And I applaud all of the panelists who preceded me, and I look forward to the one who follows me. Thank you.
Ken, thanks so much for your insightful remarks. Really, really thought-provoking afternoon. Before I forget, I wanted to let everybody know that you will all get copies of all the slides, the PowerPoint slides, and today's remarks have also all been recorded, and you will also receive copies of that through email after today's program. Now, last but not least, we have the team from Key Corp. It's my pleasure to introduce James Waters. James is General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Key Corp and serves as the company's Senior Legal Officer. He also serves as a member of Key's Executive Leadership Team and the Executive Council. James brings more than 20 years' experience in corporate law with a focus on finance. Sitting next to James is Mark Freeman. Mark is an Associate General Counsel and Assistant Secretary of Key Corp. He heads the law group's litigation, employee relations, and investment services section, which provides litigation and employee relations legal support to all of Key's lines of business. Welcome to you both, and I look forward to your comments this afternoon.
Well, thank you, and thank you to Calfee for the invitation. Delighted to be here again. I'm James Waters with Key, and pleased to have with me my colleague Mark Freeman. I do take note that we are appearing at the end of this series of presentations today, which suggests to me a couple of things as I gaze upon this august assembly. One is that we are the last thing standing between all of you and cocktails and conversation, with perhaps equal emphasis on the former. And then additionally, I note that because of a series of conflicts, Ken, am I done already? From one James to another. Due to a series of conflicts that I had earlier today, I wasn't able to attend the earlier presentations, which I really regret, and about which I'm disappointed given the caliber of the speakers and the wisdom I know they brought to this. What that also means is that there's a good chance that Mark and I will cover ground already trod by one or more speakers. However, not having been here for the earlier presentations, I can also delude myself into thinking that any observations or insights that we offer are sui generis, unique, and enlightening on their own. And so we will proceed on that basis. So just a little bit of background. I have been in seat as General Counsel of Key for now 9 months as of last week. So not quite a full year, but I'm no longer counting my tenure in days and weeks, and so I counted a win with each month, and absolutely delighted to be with the company and here in Cleveland. Prior to my time at Key, I was General Counsel of a bank in Texas, Frost Bank, smaller than Key, second largest bank in Texas, great footprint, but orders of magnitude smaller than Key. And then before that, for almost 20 years, a partner with Haynes and Boone in Dallas, and before that, Sherman and Sterling. So I offer that because the perspective that I bring to my role as General Counsel across myriad issues and considerations, including the matter of diversity, equity, inclusion, is a perspective very much informed by my having sat in these seats for the bulk of my career until fairly recently, and understanding as a practitioner the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion from that perspective and from that vantage point, but frankly, no less so in the seat that I currently occupied and the one that I occupied before this. So I note, and I will also note, I was a hiring partner for many years at Haynes and Boone with a mandate to improve and focus on and drive DE&I within that enterprise. So this is something that I have thought about and have sought to address for quite some time. Given that I'm in seat for a fairly short period of time, Mark is going to talk about some of the historical framework of what we've done and really bring us current, and then I will talk more about where we are and where we're headed and where we're driving. You know, Ken made the point well that this is This is an issue that cannot be solved alone by a single law department, single individual, even one who is committed and charismatic, and that it's going to take the involvement, the engagement, and the commitment of many persons, including people in this room. I would echo that altogether and wholeheartedly, and would say, with that in mind, that would really welcome the engagement and input from those of you who've got ideas, who are working on this. We certainly have ideas. We're talking with other industry leaders, and to the extent we don't have answers, we are finding them. But frankly, it will assist us in achieving what we are charged with achieving, and be in the best interest of those in this room to the extent that they can, to support us in those efforts. So Mark, with that.
So, as full disclosure, I cut my teeth as a lawyer here at Calfee, so everything I know, Chris Williams taught me, so you can hold that against me. I've been at Key for 21 years. I've been in charge of this section, which for I think 11 or 12, and my responsibilities keep growing, so I think that's a good thing, though I sometimes feel like the utility infielder. Historically, I would say probably in terms of impact on diversity and the profession, one of the relationships that we found beneficial is with the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms, NAMWOLF. We've had a relationship with them, I think, since 2004, and some of our go-to law firms we found through them. We've also encouraged, on occasion, we know lawyers that we work with who decide to launch their own firm. In fact, I think it's the only woman-owned law firm in Utah. I think Heidi opened up the practice about 3 or 4 years ago, and we encouraged her to join NAMWOLF. But we found that organization to be helpful in finding law firms that are diverse, that we can work with, and many of our go-to lawyers, particularly in New York and the state of Washington, we've had very long relationship and successful with. In terms of internally in the Key Law Group, turnover is not, at least until as of late, significant. So that certainly has a challenge if you're looking to, in terms of diversity as you hire. Many of our attorneys stay 30, 40 years. We just had a paralegal who retired. She was with us for 41. But we've been very conscious of, in terms of recruitment, we're working with recruiting, and as James has indicated, sort of taking a fresh look at that. But one of the things we've done, and I don't know if others here have done it, that we've been successful with, is the last 2 or 3 years, the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association has the minority clerkship program, and I think we're going to be doing in which a 1L, and they have they do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of screening. We've done that for 3 years. COVID has certainly made that a challenge, but that also helps expose diverse law students to a corporate law environment, which I think is important. So we've done sort of trying to influence both things, both in terms of the internal exposure to Key historically, which we've done for the last 2 or 3 years, and then also working with NAMWOLF, which we found to be quite successful.
Is that my cue?
That's your cue.
That's great. So at Key, diversity is an enterprise imperative. And what do I mean by that? I mean that is a value, a principle, a strategic goal and objective conveyed at the very top of the house. Some of you may know, you may have heard Chris Gorman take the public stand and make the public commitment. I see some heads nodding that by 2025, we would increase the representation of people of color within the company by 20%, and by 2030, by 50%. That's not up to 50% or up to 20%, but by 20% and by 50% from the measuring date, which was that fourth quarter of 2020?
I believe so.
So right before I joined the company, and following on the heels of the George Floyd murder and the social unrest that we saw in our nation, and the spotlight that then began to shine on issues of diversity and equity and fairness and justice and so forth. And to Chris's and the company's credit, took a bold, clear, direct stand on that. And so what does that mean? That means that the issue of diversity within Key has visibility at the top, emphasis at the top, and support at the top. It's not merely a feel-good concept. It's not merely pie in the sky, by and by. It is something that is very much embedded within the universe of objectives of the company. I will also tell you that diversity metrics, or the contribution toward the achievement of diversity metrics, said more clearly, is a factor in compensation decisions. And if you want to get folks' attention, that is one way to do it. So you can know and rest assured that this is something on which leadership and management within the firm are focused. That holds true for me as a member of the executive team, for Mark as a member of KLLT, the Key Legal leadership team, and for other members of my team. And so that's something on which we are focused very much as a team. Historically and customarily, in past years, we have sought to achieve diversity goals as a legal department, largely by engagement of law firms owned by persons of color or women. We are going to take, and we are embarking on taking, with my leadership of this group, this team, a more holistic approach. That includes that, to be sure, but we're also looking internally and externally. So internally, to the extent that we've got positions that are coming open, or either because of attrition or retirement, or because of the expansion of the team, all of which we're having. I'm really pleased about that, and we're going to have some opportunities to continue to source and identify good talent with a range of considerations in mind. But to the extent that we have those openings, the team understands that diversity must be a consideration. It's not the dispositive consideration. It is not a sole and absolute consideration, but it is relevant among the many factors of excellence and strategic significance that the team must consider. And in fact, there's a working group within the leadership team comprising Mark and a woman who's actually based in New York but was in Cleveland for some 22 years with Key, and an African-American man known by many here, Ron Johnson, I'm sure. And that working group is focused specifically on issues of diversity. How do we move the needle on the matter of diversity within Key Legal? And that group was impaneled maybe 8 to 10 weeks ago, 10 to 12 weeks ago. So they're up and running, but they are just beginning to formulate ideas and proposals and so forth. But one of them is that with an eye toward ensuring a robust and fair process on the hiring front with respect to internal hires. There will be someone who is on that committee who is part of every interview that takes place for any opening that we have. New positions, internal hires, lateral talent acquisitions. There's someone who will have eyes on that process, and who's a phenomenal lawyer, seasoned and experienced and so forth, but really to help to ensure that as a matter of process, not necessarily weighing in on the substantive qualifications of each and every candidate. That will be relevant in some number of instances, but making sure that we've got a process that looks like a process that we would be proud of, and that would be free of the kinds of unconscious bias or external factors that might inadvertently adversely affect the process and procedure of hiring, bringing people in and onto the team. So there's that from the internal perspective. We're also being really thoughtful, purposeful, and intentional about training, growth, and development, and that goes across the team. Frankly, in my view, that's not a diversity issue, strictly speaking. I believe that everyone, we're all here because we are lifelong learners. We're intellectually curious. We want to know. We want answers, and we do those things that we have to do to get answers, either by autodidactic acquisition, or by additional classes, or by sitting and talking with smart friends, aunts, uncles, and otherwise, right? So we all have to keep learning. That's important for everyone who is in our profession. I can say that, and I will just posit that as a truism. I can say definitively that that's important to me as the leader of Key Legal, that everyone have the opportunity to continue to grow and learn and develop and expand her or his skill set, to continue to perform and produce, to contribute to the company and to the work of the legal team, and to enjoy this profession along the journey. And so we're being really thoughtful, purposeful, and intentional about the training, growth, and development, and ensuring that all of the members of Key Legal get exposed, have opportunities to learn and to grow, get exposure to relevant individuals within the company. I've tried, for example, to make myself available. I know that there are other members of executive management or management otherwise who have an open door policy or otherwise very open to meeting with people to ensure that those who are coming up through the ranks and growing more senior on the journey have opportunities to gain the experience, exposure, and insight that people need to succeed and to continue to advance. So that's internal. Externally, as I noted, we'll continue to look at and engage MWBE firms, but we'll also look at majority firms as well, and be thoughtful about ways in which we are engaging with them. I feel comfortable saying that everyone here is a supporter of diversity, equity, and inclusion in some way, and to some extent. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. There are easier ways to get CLE credit and a free drink and good conversation. But I know from conversations that I've had with any number of people here that they are committed, their firms are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's not always borne out in the ways that they might want, in the ways that I want and expect, or in the ways that might be ideal. But starting from a place of goodwill and appreciating that that this is an imperative. It's a market imperative. It is specifically, as I've noted, an imperative for Key in my department. I know that it is for firms that are here as well. And so it is our expectation that these firms, will engage with us productively and constructively and thoughtfully in moving the needle in that regard. Among other things I'll say on that point is that we have one of our colleagues responsible for legal operations has has been has engaged with firms around the issue of diversity metrics. It's a question that I ask law firm partners, managing partners, practice group leaders, because if I don't ask the question, I won't have the answer. And again, I note I have been a hiring partner, and I know some of the challenges. I also know that when something is important to an industry, to a company, to a firm, there will be evidence of that in the form of investments, programs, and ultimately progress. And so it's a question I ask, and it's a question that we are asking of firms with which we do significant amounts of business. And frankly, a lot of them really welcome that discussion. A lot of them want to have the discussion. If they're doing well, they want to have it because they want to showcase and highlight their successes. If they're not doing well, they want to deal with the elephant tap dancing in the corner, and they want to be able to say, listen, we get this is important to you. It's also important to us. Let's partner on this in ways that can help move the needle for us and for you. I would say that our journey with respect to DE&I, not so much as an enterprise, but in particular as Key Legal, continues to evolve. It's evolving in the ways that I've outlined. I'm confident that it will evolve yet further when I am in perhaps month 18 or 19 and not just month 8 or 9, and really look forward to getting to know the firms represented here, some of which I know especially well, firms that do really good work for us and firms that we look to as reliable partners on critical matters. And likewise, getting to know firms that I don't yet know as well, but firms that I know have good talent, diverse talent that we have yet to tap, or that's not yet made its way to us. But I think some of the points that Ken made were really good ones about being both thoughtful and intentional about moving the needle on diversity, but also being opportunistic and really welcoming the kind of outreach that I have gotten from some number of firms, as well as the efforts that we have taken to the market. Finally, one thing I will say is that, I said a few moments ago that I'm sure everyone here is a supporter of diversity in some way or another. In every firm, you find individuals who are not, some who may be indifferent, some who may be resistant, some who may have yet stronger feelings than that. I will tell you, I've had this conversation with any number of firms, but firms are partnerships. I was a partner, really valued what that meant to me, and what it meant to me as a member of that juridical entity, the partnership, but also what it meant to me vis-a-vis my other partners and how we had to rely on and support and think and act in the best interests of one another and the partnership. And so, to the extent that in your firm you encounter those who may be resistant, it could be helpful to remind them of the idea of the collective good. I would dig deep and start citing John Stuart Mills and the greater good. I will not do so in this moment, but we'll simply note that there's much value to be said for all of us thinking collectively. And this is both truism and borderline trite. I don't mean it to be the latter, but it really is the case that when we are thinking and acting collectively, at least in the context of a law firm partnership, we all do better individually and collectively over the long term. My comments. Mark, anything else you would add as a postscript?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. Well, I will say Thank you. I will say that, echoing another of Ken's comments, I'm glad that I got to follow Ken. A James following a James could only be good precedent. There really is a lot of there's a lot of opportunity to move the needle here. It's going to require engagement, involvement, and commitment of concerned and committed parties, and I welcome the engagement of those in this room. And with that, I'm happy to field any and all manner of questions. Somebody's got to have a question.
You did state at the beginning you're between them and cocktails. So.
I am. Well, let's see. Using the Jamesian context, how much time do we have left? Wow, I guess we've got but 2 minutes left. Well, then yes. Mm-hmm.
But what sort of difficulty have you found in incorporating those things in the legal departments? Sometimes you're adding people, sometimes you're not, but you're constantly adding new things to a mix.
That's a great question. So Key does have something of an acquisitive appetite when the right opportunity appears before it. There have only been a handful of acquisitions that have been executed and consummated during my tenure so far, and none of those have come with lawyers attached. No ancillary attorneys. That said, Mark, maybe you could address that from the perspective of the first Niagara acquisition, which did come with a full team of lawyers in Western New York.
It did, but to answer your question, Richard, it wasn't additive in that respect because, quite frankly, many of them within 2 to 3 years went lateral. So at least in the most recent experience, and that was the only one that brought a significant number of lawyers.
Going once, going twice. Everyone, thank you for your time. Really appreciate having the opportunity to chat with you today.
James and Mark, thanks so much. And that concludes the formal part of our program today. I would like to again extend our sincere thanks to our panelists and also our speakers from GE Lighting, Key Corp, and Eaton. And we would like to thank all of you, those here in person and those attending virtually, for your continued attention and your participation. As Brent indicated at the beginning of the program, this is just a step. And as we can tell from the comments and remarks today, we had a lot of work to do. But we have a lot of really dedicated, interested people, and I think working together, we can make some progress. So we look forward to continuing this conversation. It's not going to be another 2 years before you hear from us. And I would like to invite everybody to join us on the mezzanine for a drink and a little light bite to eat. You can get up either through the elevators in the main hallway, or there is a stairway in the corner of the room right here. So look forward to seeing you upstairs, and thanks again for attending. Appreciate it.